All right. Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it's I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, all those things, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am here with episode 3 of the KURLAN NAISKOS, or as some people say, NAISKOS. It's pronounced differently. I checked. Somebody said I wasn't saying it right. I just want to make sure. Picard says NAISKOS, and if you go to certain pronunciations, it's NAISKOS, but let's call it KURLAN NAISKOS. And of course, I explained what that was. It was the artifact that another mistake I made was brought to Picard by Professor Galen, not Dr. Dalen Quace. Those are two different Next Generation characters. I meant to say Professor Galen. My mind is full of Star Trek trivia. I apologize. It's actually Professor Galen, played by the great Norman Lloyd in the Star Trek episode, the Next Generation episode, 6th season episode, The Chase. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, however you identify across these, the 28 known galaxies, this is the after show for Picard Season 3, Episode 3, 17 Seconds. Now, if you have not seen the show, please go away and watch it and come back and watch this. And once again, you know him, you love him. I'm bringing on Mr. Bill Hunt, he of the Digital Bits, a dyed-in-the-wool Star Trek fan. His knowledge is deep. He's also a novelist of the upcoming Space Guard series, which has yet to see publication, but he's been working on it. He wanted to get a few volumes done before he actually went to put them out for public consumption. So, Bill,
and would you call me the J. Paul Getty of physical media, or
yeah? And I was going to say, I mean, I like to say the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal of physical media. You've been covering physical media. You've actually written a book about physical media, a published book you can get, and of course, you can go to thedigitalbits.com and find out all about physical media. You've been reporting a lot on the 4K releases of the Next Generation movies, which have finally been announced. Yeah. So welcome to the 3rd episode, Bill.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Now, I need to ask you, a lot of people, I got a few tweets. Somebody said that Terry Matalas had made me the Paul Revere of Star Trek Picard Season 3, which I thought was pretty coming. So it wasn't the British are coming.
That's fair.
I'll take it. And they said that I had pretty big balls to put myself out on a limb. And of course, it's been gratifying to watch people, as I knew it was, for some people it said by the first episode, the bunk bed scene was going to lock you in because of the banter between Picard and Riker. And it's been interesting watching people come around. And there's a lot of people that I would have not thought, a lot of YouTube pundits, people like the Critical Drinker or Gary Beekler, Nerdrotic, people like even others that the Popcast guys I knew were going to love it. Yeah. But there's a lot of people that liked it that I found surprising that were able to see many of the episodes. And as you can see the story unfolding, I think more and more people are finally realizing what's actually going on, and they're seeing that method to the madness. And
oh yeah, and especially when you start to see these guys that are analyzing all the little touches and the little linkages and the Easter eggs, some of them you call it, but it becomes very clear just how deeply Terry Matalas and his production team thought about this stuff. Like they really thought deeply. So many little linkages to the Prime timeline, the Prime Star Trek as we know it. Lots of little things, and they're not overt. They're just there in the background. But when you start digging, you realize, oh my God, all of this stuff connects up, and it's lovely to see that kind of attention to the history and the lore of Star Trek being given.
Well, I think the great thing, and this episode 17 Seconds really exemplifies it, is that it's the characters and how much we love these characters that makes Star Trek. And it's the humanness of them all. And I think it's interesting watching people. There's been some, even of this episode, people have criticized, well, these aren't the same people that I know and remember. And I'm like, but that's the entire point of the show.
Yeah.
is, you know, is there's 30 years between some of them. And a lot of people think that, well, why would Beverly Crusher uh, uh, do this? Why would she leave Picard? And my contention is that, look, Star Trek The Next Generation's characters they were television archetypes in that they really weren't
Yeah.
allowed to grow and change. They had to be the
Well,
same in the way
and
Star Trek had to.
part of that was a dictate from Gene Roddenberry, right? It
Well,
was
what
the
I mean
idea that
is, what I
you
mean is,
can't have
television of the day, you had to
yeah,
reset your characters back to
yeah,
where they
yeah,
were. So the next episode, because it wasn't serialized storytelling. So
right.
sometimes they would do an episode like Family, where you would see Picard deal with his Borg trauma, but then that was one episode, and that was like a one-off. But now we're watching, writing on television has progressed, and we're really seeing who these characters are after 30 years since we've really known them.
Yeah, and I think there's a degree to which the older you are, the more you appreciate that, right? Because when you reach a certain age, it's not like you feel older, but yet you've just seen a lot more. You've had some losses, maybe some wins and some losses in your life, and you realize that there's an arc. People are still in essence the same beings they've always been, but time and circumstances does play a role in who you are and what you do and the way you feel about life and the way you see things. It's inevitable, and I think that's I mean, I was watching the after show, the Ready Room after show with Will Wheaton, where he was interviewing Frakes,
Right.
and Frakes said something really interesting, which is like, because I think now, with the exception of maybe LeVar, who's just a couple years away from it, like the main cast of the Next Generation is all in their 70s.
Yeah.
And like, name another TV series that you can watch right now where all of the all of the central characters are over 70, right? And because of that, there is just naturally they're going to be in a different place in their lives, and they're going to be seeing these things from a different perspective. But what makes it so satisfying is seeing the way these people are still who they are. They are still true to what they always stood for. They've just got new sort of new experience, new life experience to view all that from.
No, absolutely. And I think, I mean, obviously, if you haven't seen the show, we're talking spoilers, just to reiterate that one more time.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I think was great about this episode is the conversations, and it continues on through the series, the conversations that people are having with one another.
Yeah.
And I think the conversation between Picard and Beverly, when realization of the revelation comes out. I mean, the idea that, first of all, in the 24th, or now 25th century, I don't have a problem with people that are older being able to conceive children. I mean, I don't have whether it was with artificial means, just the same way that I don't have, I was talking earlier about if someone, for instance, if a human being was born trans, they could use 25th century technology and change themselves almost immediately to who they really are. I have no problem with that. Just the way that when a Vulcan and a human being have an intermarriage, they probably had to, or intermarriage, or just not intermarriage, or just intermarry.
Yeah.
You'd probably have to
you
use.
You saw that in Enterprise with T'Pol and Trip, right?
Yeah,
At the end of that show.
And
they directly talked about that.
Yeah, and there had to be some kind of, medical intervention to make sure they could conceive a child because our biologies are different. But once you're past that, of course, I have no problem believing that Beverly that she conceived a child and carried it to term. And Picard, she really comes right out and explains it when she says, look, I lost my parents, I lost my husband, and I lost my son Wesley to the stars that you love. And I wanted somebody that I could keep close, and I knew that I could not protect them from your space, your stars, Picard.
Right.
And I thought that was a wonderful conversation, and it really rung true to me. And we never got to know Beverly Crusher enough to know exactly how she thinks, the way that she was explaining herself.
Right. That's absolutely true. And in the movies, they shifted to, these action storylines in the Next Generation movies. So you still didn't get to know some of these characters really deeply.
No.
And yeah, they absolutely get into it. And that's one of the things I love about this season of Picard is that it's very character driven. I mean, you've got events that people are reacting to, But a lot of the stuff, I mean, Beverly reaching out to Picard and Riker and Picard going out after her, all of that is motivated by character, by who these people are, by their relationships, and that it was really interesting I think the end of the first episode when we see Beverly for the first time, or Picard sees Beverly for the first time.
That's at the end of last week's episode.
At the end of last week's episode, right? When Riker brings her out onto the bridge, that moment, and Picard turns and sees her, that moment mirrors a moment from Encounter at Farpoint, when the two characters see each other after not having seen each other for many, many years.
Right.
And it's like that emotional, I want to say baggage, but that emotional, burden that we all carry influences, who people are. And I just love, you talk about the scene with Riker and Beverly where they're talking. I also love that at that same moment, Riker takes Jack out into the corridor, and he's reluctant to at first, but once they get out there, right, Jack is, once they get past the uneasiness with each other, Jack essentially says, look, I didn't ask for this. I didn't, all these people are resentful of me now because, we've put their lives in danger, but I didn't ask for it. And Riker's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's like, this is the cross you bear, right? This is, we don't get to control that stuff. Now your job is to make the best of it, to try to make the best outcome of this. And it's, I love that. I love the idea that Picard in many ways is in, there's a moment in this episode where Picard kind of becomes Riker's number one.
He even says it, isn't it about time that, you called me number one? It's great.
And I love that in terms of the characters, Picard has always been Riker's mentor, but in this episode, that dynamic reverses a little bit. And, it's Riker who's telling Picard about, what it is to have a children, what it's like to be a father, and what that's going to mean to you when you find yourself in that circumstance. And it's really interesting. It does shift the dynamic between the two of them in a really interesting way. There's certainly much more equals, at this point in their lives. They are, truly lifelong friends, and it's really fascinating the way that dynamic shifts.
Well, even Riker says in that flashback scene, I hope one day, you'll be able to know what that means, and the idea that the title 17 Seconds, when Riker says, it's the longest 17-second turbo lift ride of my life, when he thought his son Thaddeus was, that there was going to be something wrong. And ironically, it's funny, there's been a lot made of, and rightfully so in fan circles, that it's too bad that Picard season 3 has to deal with the baggage of seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is I think that Terry Matalas and his writing staff took all the things that were good, and yes, there were a few things. The idea that the Rikers had a child that passed away. I mean, that this is something parents go through.
Yeah.
And we know that because of season 1. And when they come out and you see Riker explaining to Picard, obviously I don't think this has happened yet when they had this flashback conversation.
Right.
And how much, because it was new, but to know the tragic backstory of that adds something to that poignant conversation that they're having.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've described myself as a canonist, a canon pornographer, as it were. I like an adherence to canon because I love lore. And
we're a historian.
Yeah, that's what it is. And I always saw Star Trek as a period piece of a future that never occurred. And even the original series, my beloved original series, had inconsistencies. There was the United Earth Space Probe Agency, there was Starfleet, there was the Federation, how it all worked together. And in my mind, I always thought, well, nobody sits there and explains all this to you when you meet people in the street. Like if someone says, yeah, I work for the Seattle Police Department, you don't necessarily understand how the entire department works, so there might be adjunct places or whatever. You don't know. So to me, it wasn't inconsistencies so much as we got information the way it was doled out to us, and we then had to figure it out. And with Star Trek, then you had all these manuals and books that came out trying to make sense of it all, which is I grew up reading. So
me too.
And having all that put together. So when someone says that, well, this wasn't entirely consistent with what I saw 30 years ago in this episode, I'm like, yeah, because we only had certain information, like the virus that from the first episode, when they talked about the navigational virus that the Borg had. Hellbird. And we didn't hear that before. But that, to me, that doesn't contradict anything. It was just that we as viewers, we only saw what was going on the command deck of the Enterprise D, we didn't see what was going on in navigation. People don't know that, but there are whales on board the Enterprise D.
That's right.
If you have
That's right.
actually,
That's the navigation.
yeah,
Right.
in the navigation, there are whales. They're a part of the crew, just like
Yeah.
people never knew. And we'll get to this in a minute because we'll talk about Star Trek Discovery, but in Star Trek Discovery, in the original incarnation of it, there was a large tardigrade character called Ephraim that worked in engineering. That was in the Brian Fuller conception of Discovery, but they couldn't do that. But then they later recycled the idea of a tardigrade later in the first season in a weird, ridiculous way. So, there's all these things, and as fans, we have to come to grips with all of that stuff. But everybody's trying to say, well, if this happened in this episode, well, yeah, but that's like me telling you what happened in a day in my life, and then 10 years later telling you another detail that you hadn't heard before.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is the way we encounter information in real life, we don't know everything. We
Right.
don't know everything about people. We only get little snippets in, and sometimes the snippets we get might not even be accurate, right?
Right.
We might not have the full picture, or the person might be presenting themselves in a way that is not fully truthful in terms of what's really going on in their lives. That happens all the time. So, yeah, you have to, in reality, you have to fill in those gaps. But I think when you look back at the history of Star Trek, I think prior to with the 2005, I think when Enterprise ended, they did a pretty good job. I mean, there were some inconsistencies, but all in all, they did a pretty good job sort of unifying it and tying it all together, and it worked. And I think what was satisfying, one of the things that was satisfying about Star Trek is that people made an effort to do that. People made an effort to acknowledge that stuff. And what's been so frustrating about the new stuff, starting with the 2009 film and going through, Discovery and in the last couple of seasons of Picard and even Strange New Worlds, is that they're making almost no effort to honor that stuff, just on a very surface level. But if they've got a better idea for their story, they have no problem retconning everything and changing everything. And I think it just feels disrespectful. That's, as a longtime fan, it's like I get that sometimes you've got to update and you've got to refresh. I get that. I can roll with that. But when you do it in every new incarnation multiple times, often in every episode, there's some new thing that they just, that thing that you knew the way you thought you knew it, you don't know it anymore. It's different. And it's, major characters changing the nature of the character of Spock, changing the nature of the character of Kirk. It after a while, it starts to feel like a deliberate poke in the eye. It feels like disrespect.
No, it does. And the thing is, to me, if someone is tasked with writing or working on an IP, first of all, they should have a love of that IP. I would never hire somebody unless they came in with a deep knowledge and love of that IP. And then this idea is that you want to take what made the IP successful in the first place and continue it on. Yeah. And that is in itself an interesting creative task.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of modern writers, I think a lot of people, by the way, they look down their nose at Star Trek. They think Star Trek was either naive. Nowadays, it's the product of, of the old Camelot White House era of Kennedy's optimism, which was true. Right. And don't you understand what kind of we look at the way we used to do things because now we think we're so evolved and aware of everything that everybody wants.
And yet at the same time, now we are more stressed and angry than ever before. And the whole point of Star Trek to me always was that you saw this future. And there were problems. There were still issues that, that have to be dealt with. But that's a future that's better than where we are today. And that's a future you wanted to be a part of. You wanted to be part of making that happen. And you look at what I've seen at least since 2005, I don't see any kind of a future that I would want to be a part of. It's almost a dystopia, Star Trek, the modern Star Trek. It's not anything I would want to be a part of. It's the same way I feel about the Marvel Cinematic Universe to a certain extent, is that like it's fun, but if you actually lived in that world where aliens are just coming down and destroying like cities wholesale and like super beings with essentially magical powers are just like smashing up like whole blocks and just causing devastation everywhere. It's like, imagine being just an average person living in that society. If you didn't like kill yourself, you'd probably go like find a bunker in Siberia and just like,
it'd be terrifying.
Yeah,
I mean, especially after like a celestial comes up out of the ocean, and Arishem,
Yes,
the judge, says you will be judged. I mean, how do
right.
you were snapped away for 5 years, and you come back 5 years later, and your kid's
Yeah.
5 years older, and
And
you've
and and
lost.
and imagine if you lived in that world and half your friends just disappeared overnight. Like nobody, no human being could psychologically handle that. I
No,
mean, it's and that's what it feels like, you know. And too much of that is what's going on today. I mean, we see. I mean, everybody's mad about everything, and everybody's got an agenda, and nobody's listening. Everybody's talking and screaming and canceling each other, and nobody's listening, and
no.
nobody's understanding that at the end of the day, we are all way more the same than we are different. I've yet to meet a person, even for someone who's on the complete opposite end of me politically, that you can't sit down and once you get past all of that weird, you know, default to like the shouting and the rhetoric and the stupidity, you can't just like have a meal with or have a coffee with or have a beer with and relate to them as a human being. And to me, that's the essence of where Star Trek should be, not this just dark, gloomy, everything is oppressive and horrible. And, you know, people like carrying their childhood traumas onto the bridge and breaking down in stressful moments.
Well,
And
that's what they did to Spock in Star Trek '09. I
yes,
mean,
yeah,
in a way, one of the reasons I really, really, really hate that movie is they completely destroyed the character of Spock. And
yeah. And
I
then they
don't,
continue to do that in Discovery too,
yeah, I
with
don't
like,
believe, I don't blame Zachary Quinto and Ethan Peck, who's playing Spock on Discovery and Strange New Worlds. I think is doing a fine job.
yeah,
I really
yes,
do, with the
yeah,
best. But then they saddle him with a learning disability. They saddle him with a sister that we never knew about that made him the person he
right.
is today, the Vulcan he is today. Oh, I hate all of that stuff.
Right. And
All-
how
all-
about, you know, and the thing of it is that stuff would be great if you didn't do it to didn't take an iconic character that we already know and love and
yeah,
saddle him with a
cr-
create a new character that's dealing with that
yeah.
stuff.
And that's
Move
another
on.
thing. I think a lot of the new characters. I mean, to me, a character like Doug Jones is doing a great job playing Saru, but
Yeah.
that character is almost a cliche Star Trek character in a
Right.
way. And then
By the way, all those actors I think are doing a great job.
they're
Like
doing a
I
great
think,
job.
yeah, they really are. All of them. I mean, all the people on Discovery I mean, I really, it's not their fault. It's that the people that are writing this stuff are just they're playing so loose with everything that makes Star Trek Star Trek. It's sort of like I think I said this last week in the last episode, but it's sort of like some of these new writers were hired to work on Star Trek and they were given an assignment. Okay, go watch the 30 most important episodes of Star Trek.
And
And
they
so
didn't watch; they just read the BuzzFeed list.
right, or they watched like the first 4 or 5 and went,
Yeah.
this is easy, and then they went and watched Game of Thrones, and then it's like, we should make our show more like that, and it's that's not what Star Trek is. It was not what it ever should be. And the interesting thing is now, I just saw an article in Variety where Chris Pine was, I guess he gave an interview with Esquire, where he talked about the dysfunction in the movie side of Star Trek, and he's like, look, we don't even know what the hell's going on.
Right.
It's so dysfunctional. I'm not involved. I'm out of the loop. Nobody's consulting me. Nobody's talking with me. It's frustrating because I love this franchise and I love this cast and I love doing this, but like I'm so outside the loop on this stuff. And the people who are inside the loop don't get it. They just don't get it. Star Trek is not supposed to be like, you know, Marvel roller coaster movies. Star Trek is not supposed to be Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not supposed to be like a
Well,
giant, big blockbuster, ridiculous entertainment.
the mandate has always been, especially since 2009, we want Star Trek to be more like this.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's not. What's really interesting is that Star Trek has always been niche, but it's always been an audience pleaser. And if you go back to 1994, Star Trek was huge. It arguably that's probably the best, the most popular it's been in the cultural zeitgeist.
Oh
You
my
had
God.
the
That whole period with Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2.
well, that was a
I was
little earlier, but when
It
Star
was a
Trek,
little earlier, but I remember when I was in college and that first Best of Both Worlds Part 1 dropped. I remember everybody was like, "Oh my God." People you never ever thought were watching Star Trek were watching Star Trek.
well, but absolutely, and then the when Next Generation became really popular, but in
Yeah,
1994, you had All Good Things. You
right.
had Generations coming out 6 months later.
Yeah.
Star Trek was on the cover of Time magazine.
Mhm.
And when Next Generation went off the air, it had its largest ratings ever. Deep Space Nine had started, and Star Trek was at its zenith of popularity.
Yeah.
Now, during the Berman era, that popularity waned. You
Well,
know,
some of that too was also that the Berman era got stuck with the whole UPN, all the
Yeah.
reorganization
And
at Paramount.
And I would say that what's interesting to me is that, Voyager, because people had criticized Deep Space Nine, so the ratings of Deep Space Nine had gone down. But
Yeah.
I would say what also happened in culture at the time, television was starting to change. Serialized storytelling was becoming the norm.
Right.
And Deep Space
Shows
Nine,
like X-Files and 24 were starting to become.
yeah, I mean, X-Files started in
Envoy's Battlestar
93.
Galactica.
Yeah, there was all that stuff, and it was changing. But then when they got to something like Voyager, again, Voyager was trying to recreate the original series and Next Generation to be a ship-based show.
Right.
And again, it was Voyager was kind of a show of Star Trek tropes. You had your half Klingon, you had half alien, half human character in B'Elanna Torres, and then you had this sort of mix and match, plug and play Star Trek characters, which, and then in a way, I don't want to relitigate the sins of Star Trek's past, but
Sure.
it was because it was a franchise, they tried to keep it going and keep it familiar. But I think if they had embraced this idea that they were trying to get home, but if they had made Voyager a show about how do you go to the new world and start a society,
Yeah.
and if they'd made it like we're never getting home.
Yeah.
We're not getting home. We're cut off from our supply line.
Right.
And how do we bring the Federation forward and not make the mistakes of Christopher Columbus or not make the mistakes of colonization? You could have done something really, but they weren't going to.
How interesting could that have been, right?
But they're not going to.
Look at what happened with Enterprise. It turns out, Enterprise was controversial when it came out, but it turns out that those guys really did try to do something different. And the network just basically said, no, what are you doing?
Right.
We want what you've done 100 times before. And then when they started to do that, then the ratings started to decline. And then the network just said, well, screw this. We're not going to support it anymore. And the shame of it is that right around that time is when the show really found its legs. And that last couple of seasons, especially that fourth season, is some of my favorite Star Trek period, because they were directly building up to the founding of the Federation and the Romulan War, and there were
the 3-part Vulcan arc that begins with the Forge or Demons and Terra Prime.
Demons and Terra Prime is that's
peak.
Some of my favorite Star Trek of all time.
Oh,
it's so good.
Peak Star Trek, and
it's the idea that in order for humans to really to prove that they are worthy of being out in this community of equals out in the galaxy, they've got to the last obstacle is you got to overcome your own failings, your own prejudices, and your own fears, and like that. I mean, it's such a great idea, and I think it resonates because it's true today. For us to ever get to a place where we're going to be anything like the Federation, if we're lucky, we've got to overcome we've got a lot. Our technology advances way more rapidly than our emotional selves, our civilization, our sociological selves, the way we interact with each other, the way we treat each other, our biases, our prejudices. Like that's the thing that's the last obstacle we're going to have to overcome. And we might never fully overcome it, but we can make progress. Right. And that's the essence of Star Trek to me, is that idea is that we can become better than we are now. We'll never be perfect, but we can become better than we are now.
100%. And I think, one of the interesting things that I think Terry Matalas and the writers have built into this season of Picard is it's all about what, the last episode of Deep Space Nine is called What You Leave Behind, or What We Leave Behind, What You Leave Behind. This show is all about what is our own legacy? What is our personal legacy to the people that we love?
Yes.
And what does how we leave behind change the people that are coming after us? And to a certain extent, that's happening throughout the whole series.
Yeah. And one of the things that's great is that we never really saw a lot of difficult stuff happen on the Next Generation. But what I love is that like this episode, 17 seconds, and the next one, especially without getting into spoilers, this is very much like Riker and Picard together facing the Kobayashi Maru. It is very much a long, dark night of the soul. This couple of episodes, and how they crash through it and overcome it is so great. It's so great, and I love that. I love the idea that, look, these guys probably took the Kobayashi Maru test when they were at Starfleet we've seen them overcome things in the past, but now here they are, all these years later, 20, 30 years later, and they're still facing, a challenge like that. And I love it so much. Seeing these two guys and this whole crew, the way they pull together, new and old, by the way, the new characters too, the way they all work together, despite their fears and their insecurities, but it's so great. It's so true to what Star Trek has always been, should always be.
I mean, especially in a way, I really love the way that they've structured this season. Like the 3-act structure of a movie.
Right.
Episodes 1 through 4 are Act 1. Episodes 5 through 8 are Act 2, and then episodes 9 and 10 are the whiz bang mic drop finale. And what I find really interesting, especially episodes 3 and 4, 17 seconds, and then next week's episode, they take it becomes so dire, and like you said, the Kobayashi Maru, the no-win scenario, and I don't think it's any, it's not telling tales out of school to say that yes, people endure, they will make it to episode 5, because it's a 10-episode arc, but it is so beautifully Star Trek.
Yes,
the end of Act 1, and it is. I mean, that was when. For me, the end of episode 4 was a time when I was like, and we can't obviously say anything about it, but I was like, I had not, it made me feel something that the very best of Star Trek had made me feel. And what's interesting is that, there are many touchstones throughout this. People say, well, Kirk had a son and that he didn't know about in Star Trek 2. No, he knew about his son.
Right.
And he made a choice to stay out of his son's life. I stayed away, and I did what you asked. In this thing, Picard wasn't given a choice. Right. Beverly made the choice for him. And I thought that was a beautiful scene. And he's now, you didn't give me the choice to make. So it's not, sure, the idea of somebody's long-lost relative or a child is definitely a trope of drama or whatever. Yeah. And that's fine with me, but to see it played out this way in Star Trek, it's not the same. And I thought
what I love too is that the kid has agency in this. Jack has agency in this too. And what Picard learns in this episode is like, why didn't you let me have this opportunity? And she basically says, Jack chose not to. When I gave Jack the opportunity to come meet you, and I told him where to find you, and he chose not to. And
dude, and they follow up on that.
They sure do.
Woo!
They sure do. And that's what I really love about this show. What this show is doing is what Star Trek at its prime always did. Is that you've got like the story that they're advancing, and you've got the character arcs they're advancing, but at some point there's always a flourish or a new wrinkle or a new revelation that they make that just makes you go, oh my God, and it just fills you with that with emotion, right? That's what Star Trek at its best always did. And boy, this episode and the next one especially, man, I like you at the end of without revealing anything. It just made me, because the first 3 episodes are like, wow, this is really good. Like, I'm really like, this feels like Star Trek. I'm really digging it. But that 4th episode really brings it home in a way that just made me very emotional. And I think that's this. You had told me that there was an episode that was like that early on, and I'd forgotten. But when it happened, I'm like, oh, I get it now. I get it. This was quite good.
Yeah, and it's even the antagonists are revealed to have emotional and reasons that I think we can all understand. For it's funny because everyone it's not Wrath of Khan. It's not like,
right.
Khan Noonien Singh was given a second chance, and he had a beef. Admiral Kirk never bothered to check on our progress,
right.
And it's true, he didn't, and perhaps he should have. Even Spock says to him, it might be interesting, to come by this and see what fruit sprouted from the seed you had planted today.
And none of them could have realized that Ceti Alpha 6 was going to explode, right? I mean, that's just chance. It happened, and I mean, so that villain was grounded. He was grounded and he was motivated, but the thing that's important to remember, I think, for great drama is that there is no villain who thinks he's the villain in his own story. Every villain thinks he's the hero in his own story. Either that or else he's just truly psychologically completely detached and he's no longer really human. I mean, something like a Jason or whatever from Friday the 13th. But look at Thanos. Thanos is a compelling villain because he thinks he's the hero in his own story. And that's what makes a great villain compelling, is when you go back and you look at what they've done, and you can see the steps by which that person, that being, came to that place. And I think that's what makes great drama, is that, look, every human being has the capacity for good or evil. And it's not an overnight thing. Whether you become a good person or an evil person is all about the little steps, the little choices you make every day, all along the way. And then once you get down to the end of that road, you realize where you are, and you might be the hero, or you might not. And that's what makes human agency so important, is that we all every day have choices that we make, and the sum of those choices determines what good or evil is.
No, absolutely. And look, I really love the character of Jack Crusher. I think Ed Speleers, and as the show moves along and you learn more about him, people are going to like the character even more.
Yeah. Agreed.
And again, the what's happening on the show, like, obviously, and let me ask you this, as the plot, what's going on, as I like to call it, the Tom Clancy techno thriller that we're in the middle of,
Yes.
We now know that the changelings are involved, and we hear some really interesting things. Like, I want to talk to you about Worf. And how Worf's introduction, when, I am son of Sergei, House of Martok. Yeah, how Bane of the Duras family. Here's some chamomile tea. What a great way to introduce.
Yeah. What I love about that, what I love about where Worf is you remember the film that came out, I think it was 2002, Zhang Yimou's Hero?
Oh yeah.
Right? The whole plot of that film is about the journey of a warrior, right? And the idea of that film is that the ultimate ideal of a warrior is inner peace. Is you lay down your weapons. The ultimate ideal of a warrior is not to fight anymore. And it's, what's so great is that Worf is at this place now. We've seen him, be badass, and we've seen him have things he had to overcome, and we know he's a kick-ass character, but like he's on this journey now. He's like a warrior monk now. He's almost like a samurai, where he's become this warrior monk, and he's realizing that, like, the journey, he's got to go farther in his journey. And it's not enough just to be a warrior. You've got to find that inner peace and balance.
Well, now let me ask you this. A lot of people, we criticized Picard for being murder Trek. So many people died in those episodes. Yes. And when they introduced the character of Elnor, how he was cutting off people's heads and all that, people said, oh, this is just murder Trek with Worf. And when Sneed puts the head of a Romulan on a table, and all of these people pull, his henchmen pull their guns,
right,
all bets are off. I mean, lethal force has been used. He's a murderer. He's a murderer, and all the people that work for him, by definition, are murderers. And not only that,
all those characters in that scene had agency and made choices that led them there, right? And in that moment, the only way, look, Worf knows, that the stakes are much, much higher. And look, Rafi made a choice to be there. Sneed made the choices he made to be there. So it's different. Like, whereas in season 1 of Picard, where you had people just gratuitously getting their eyes, just like, I mean, that, to me, those characters didn't have agency. They were victims, and they were victims of a plot. These characters in that scene that you're talking about, where Worf is introduced, they all had agency. They all made choices that put them there. That's the difference to me.
And then what I love is that Worf says he spoke with someone in the Great Link, a man of honor. He doesn't say Odo, but we know what he's talking about.
No, but it's Odo, right? It's right. It's so good.
And what I really liked is, and this will continue to play out as we find out what's going on, he says that this person told me, Odo, told me that there was a group of call them fundamentalists, call them jihadists, call them crusaders, call them whatever you want, of changelings that were not happy with this ceasefire after what was done.
And here's the thing that's interesting about that is that that is the result of war. When you get to a point where you're at war and it's violence on violence. Look, sometimes, violence is never the first choice, right? Violence is always the last resort. But when violence happens, there's always a consequence of that. And one of the consequences is that no matter how justified you think your cause is, you're going to radicalize someone on the other side. Like, the outcome is not going to be clean. It's never going to be clean.
And again, what are the ramifications of that conflict? In a way, it's not just people who leave something to the next generation. It's these societal conflicts that do as well.
Yeah.
And now we know that there are a group of changelings. We don't know what they're doing or what's happening, but that because of the end of the Dominion War and the way it ended and what the Federation might have done, we know that there are people that have beef. By the way, legitimate beef. If you look into if you're a Deep Space Nine fan, it was not any. There was problems with both sides.
Yeah, and they get into that. They get in. I mean, certainly Deep Space Nine, they explore that, and then in episodes to come, they address some of that too. That's the thing is nothing happens in a vacuum, man. People, nothing happens in a vacuum. And you think about like terrorism today, especially like in the Middle East, and everybody, it's so easy to reduce this stuff to cartoon characters. But imagine if you grew up as a kid in a society where there were no opportunities for you. There were no jobs for you. There were no legitimate paths. And you saw all around you your friends and family members and people, loved ones dying as casualties in a conflict. And you had no way out of that. You had no choice, no path out of that. What are you going to do? What is any human being going to do? You're going to get mad. You're going to be resentful. You're going to strike out. And then someone comes to you and says, hey, all these problems that you have, all these losses that you have, it's those guys' fault. And here's a gun. And by the way, we'll pay you. So you can feed your family. It's like these things they happen for a reason. And we too often, this is another reason why I'm not a huge fan of superhero stuff, because it makes everything so simplistic. It's all good and evil, and it's very, very simplistic. And when you study history and when you live a few decades out in the real world, what you begin to realize is it's never that simple. It's never that simple. Everything is it's black. It's not black and white. Everything is gray. And that's what's more interesting to me is that's the real challenge is how do we overcome that?
Right. And I think that, we've been introduced to our antagonist, Captain Vadic. And what I love is, first of all, I'm having so much fun with Amanda Plummer's performance. She's clearly, but what I think people need to understand about her is she's performing for our characters. She's playing a part herself in terms of the way she has a very definite agenda and stuff's going on with her. But when she's talking to it's not because she's not like Trelane in the Squire of Gothos.
Right. There's a theatricality to what she's doing for a reason.
And
there's no doubt that there's also a little bit of an homage to what her father did in the Undiscovered Country too.
Yeah.
Which was also theatrical. It was also very theatrical.
He's having fun. He has his own agenda, but he's clearly relishing what he's doing. Yeah. Remember that Chang, General Chang, was part of a wider a plot, and he knew what he was doing, but he's like, well, okay, I agree with you. I agree with all of you, but I'm going to and I'm throwing my towel in with you people, but I'm going to have fun while I'm doing it. Right. Like he was completely fucking with, like he's like, you're asking me to fuck with James T. Kirk? Are you kidding me? Yeah, while I'm a part of the rest of this thing that's happening.
Yeah, he actually he talks to, I said Picard, but he challenges Kirk. He said, don't you prefer it this way? One warrior to warrior, right? It's like
in space, all warriors are cold warriors.
Right.
I mean, but and what's great is that the rest of the crew, didn't know that there was even a wider ranging conspiracy happening. and
Yeah.
and they were discovered. That's part of the mystery. And Vadic Vadic definitely has an agenda,
Yeah.
but is having a great time, and while she's doing it, but even she has motivations.
Yeah, totally. And how about in this episode too? How about is it Sydney that is LaForge's daughter,
Yes.
who's the pilot?
By the way,
Like,
I love her.
yeah,
I
yes,
love Sydney LaForge. I mean, maybe I have a
yeah.
little bit of a crush on her. Probably too young for me, what can I
She's
say?
a great character.
She's a great character. And one of the things that I think Terry and his crew have done, and you see this a lot in the next episode, they make you love the secondary bridge crew.
Yes,
I
they
think
do.
all of
100%.
the actors that they cast in these roles on the bridge, even though they don't play a large part, there's always insert shots. If you watch the way it's set up and shot,
Yeah,
there are always insert shots of these characters showing that they have a vital role to play
yeah,
in
and they're
what's
not
going
just
on.
stock. They're not just stock background. They all are playing a vital role. We see them as professionals.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I love too, is you see sometimes there are moments where they all start like the chatter because they're all in work mode. They're all reacting. They're all professional. They know what their jobs are. They're doing them. And I love the secondary characters on the show and the way they're given agency and depth, even just little moments, but we see them being good at what they do, and we see them being courageous, and we see them contributing. And I love that, because that's what those characters should be. This is a professional space navy. That's who they should be.
Yeah.
And you can build on that. I mean, what I love is throughout the season we see that continue with these secondary characters, and there's a you can build on that for the future, right? There's a way to do that that I hope Paramount takes. Route I hope they take.
Well, it's interesting. There's always been talk of them doing all the way back to Harv Bennett. He wanted to do a Starfleet Academy show.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was a really dumb idea.
Yeah.
It's
the interesting thing about that is like what we've seen on Discovery. We've seen a lot of characters on Discovery struggling to overcome their past trauma, their insecurities, right. We've seen a lot of that. And I always thought if you took all of that out of that context and put it in a Starfleet Academy kind of show, then you could get away with it. Then it would be plausible to me that these characters are not ready for prime time yet. They should never be on a starship. None of those people should be on a starship. It doesn't feel to me like they have any idea what they're doing, or, they learn over the course of Discovery. They rise to the challenge, some of them, most of them.
They would never be assigned to that experimental ship.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And that's part of the reason. I mean, I never believed Discovery for a minute. It never suspended from the production design to the way. And it's really interesting. One of the things I don't think people even realize is that the design of the Discovery came from the Star Trek Planet of the Titans movie that was going to be made in the mid-'70s, that Ken Adam was the production designer for, and Ralph McQuarrie, the great production illustrator that had so much to do with Star Wars, he designed that ship.
He did.
And then after Brian Fuller left, they redesigned it and made it lame. Like they decided no more round nacelles or we're going to do.
So that's the thing that surprised when you told me like what it was Discovery was originally going to be, what Brian Fuller had, how he conceived it, and the way he rationalized it and grounded it in science. The idea, the whole mycelial network and stuff, that was about terraforming.
It was about terraforming.
And that's a great idea. That makes scientifically, that's a really interesting idea. But then you turn that into, oh no, it's it's how the propulsion works. And it's like that.
Well, that's because they figured, well, we have to change as much as we can from Brian Fuller's conception to make it ours. Right. And then clearly someone's like, oh, it's like Dune. They're folding space through the micellular. Because clearly Brian Fuller and Neil Druckmann and all the people that made The Last of Us watched the same zombie ant fungus nature documentaries in the aughts, and they all keyed on that. But
this is the same problem I had with the movie Prometheus. Because if you watch, Charlie de Lauzirika's great behind the scenes documentary.
That is one of the greatest. His Alien 3 documentary and Charlie's documentary, that Prometheus thing, is one of the greatest, to me, documentaries about how something goes awry.
Yeah, because you see what went wrong and why. I mean, it's like as they were making that film, it was meant to be a direct prequel to the original Alien. It was meant to be that, and it was all the original script was the space script was rational and logical, and it made sense, and everything was justified. And then, Ridley just, well, I've done that before. I don't want to do that again. So halfway through the process, he got bored and wanted to do new stuff.
And hired Damon Lindelof.
They hired Damon Lindelof, and it's like, and all of a sudden, the script just makes no sense whatsoever. And things that were justified and grounded in the original draft, suddenly now you've got a whole crew of basically incompetent people who the first thing they do when they walk up on an alien planet, they see an alien creature and they take off their masks and start poking it and stuff. And you just go, this makes no sense whatsoever.
And what it does is
wow, I want to see that movie.
It shatters all credibility. All credibility is out the window. And that's, for me,
and that's how I feel about Discovery.
Yeah. You could never,
when you realize what they were originally trying to do, what Fuller was trying to do, and then you see what happened. It's like, oh my God. I mean, down to the point of like one of the first things you see in the first episode of Discovery is Klingons who, one, don't look like Klingons, and two, can't even speak because they got so much prosthetics and like stuff in their mouth. They can't even speak. And you're like, my God, what is this? What is this ridiculous thing I'm watching?
Yeah, and I know that Brian wanted to always make the Klingons. People say, well, Brian wanted the Klingons like that. Yeah, but he wouldn't have wanted them to where they couldn't speak.
Right.
Totally. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas there, but even things like the Klingon sarcophagus ship. Klingons understand that once a person's dead, who they are is gone. Right. They have no reverence for a dead body.
Right.
Because they understand the honor, the essence of, and I like that. I think that's great.
Yeah. But see, the difference is that last mile, right? You can have lots of interesting ideas, but if you don't ground it in the production design and in the writing, it makes no sense whatsoever. And that's what Terry and Dave Blass and his team that's what they've all done. Is everything you see is grounded. Everything you see is rational. Everything you see has been thought through deeply. And so it's not just there because it's cool or it's like, oh, look at that. That's awesome or whatever. It's a neat design. Like, no, there's every single aspect of what you're seeing and hearing has been just deeply thought through by people who really get it, who understand Star Trek, who know how to make it all coherent and make it grounded in what feels like a reality. Even if it's a fictional reality, this feels like a real grounded universe.
Well, and what's really interesting is you look at, like, I think one of the great creation, I do think that actually two of the great creations to get not just one, but two great characters in Ed Speleer's Jack Crusher. And, a lot of people talk about how he's like that young, brash Han Solo type, but he's really not that way because Han Solo was all about self-interest, and Jack Crusher he wants to help. He follows he's had to learn how to act a certain way. He's on the frontier trying to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, but he's doing everything he can to help people in need.
Yeah.
And he's not Robin Hood borrowing from the rich. He's not stealing from the rich to give to the poor. What he's doing is he's in a world that there is no way to do things correctly. I'm not part of the Federation, so I have to improvise. He's an improviser. Yeah. He's a fly by the seat of his pants improviser with the overarching idea that we are here to help.
Right. And what you'll find out, and this isn't really a spoiler, but what you'll find out over time about this character is that he's run away from his father. He's run away from the Federation. He's run away from that life to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a part of him that doesn't still look at that and go, does some level he kind of admires it. Yes. And which gives so much dimension to the character. And
dare say that the character of Jack Crusher is a fanboy when it comes to a certain thing, and I'm not going to say what that is.
Yes.
But when it's revealed, I'm like, he's me.
Yes.
It's just like, and it was so well done. I was just like, oh, and
by the way, how about Seven too? How about the way Seven stands up for herself and becomes a more confident. She overcomes. She's like she knows what the right things to do is, and she wants to do the right thing, but she keeps being presented with obstacles to doing the right thing. And the way she finds a way to stand up and gain confidence throughout the course of the season is also really satisfying. And that is a part of that is connected to like Sydney's character, Sydney LaForge, and all of these other characters around her. The way it's the whole idea that these people are better together, right? They're better together.
Well, and what's interesting is this is a fairly new crew. Like Captain Shaw, it was probably saddled with Seven because as we might learn, there's a reason why she probably wasn't his first choice. I don't know. You know, there's all kinds of things going on here, and it's all beautifully constructed. And you have to kind of
too. The Captain Shaw, like his character just gets more and more interesting throughout this episode, and I love the way he keeps kind of reluctantly rising to the challenge, and he keeps contributing, and he keeps becoming he's not just a buffoon. He really does get more and more interesting, and that's the thing is there's no character on this show that you go, that is they're a scapegoat, or they're just stock. These people all feel, as you watch more and more, you learn that there's more to all of these people than meets the eye.
Well, I have to say that, I mean, the character of Rafi was never somebody I thought one of the most ill-conceived characters of Star Trek Picard. I mean, They literally have a woman of color living in a trailer park as a drug addict, literally on Picard. Yeah. And what's really interesting about this is I hated this character. And Star Trek Picard season 3, and at first I'm like, enough. But as we watch, her relationship with Worf develops into something I really have fun with.
And I love that it's Worf who gives her an opportunity to stand up.
Yes.
And helps her find her place in a way that she hasn't since we've seen her. She just hasn't, and it's Worf who leads her on that path. And it's so good. Someone's really thinking about all of this stuff.
Yeah, Terry Matalas.
Yeah, I know. And what's crazy about that, and obviously he's got a good team of writers, but the crazy thing about that is, like, when the hell did he conceive this season? Like, I just want to know.
Well, here's
when did you start writing this stuff? Like, when? Because it had to be fast, because they shot season 2 and season 3 back to back, basically.
It was very fast. And here's the thing. I mean, I didn't know Terry Matalas, until 6 or 7 months ago or whatever, because of Twitter. But I've come to I greatly respect him, and I think, especially, like, I had watched 12 Monkeys. He was the co-showrunner of 12 Monkeys. Yeah. 12 Monkeys is a really tightly constructed show. And when I watched it, I watched it because I liked the movie, but I didn't pay that much attention to it. Like, I watched it, I liked it. Yeah. But I didn't think a lot about it. Well, Terry actually gave me the Via Vision from Australia box set. They did a beautiful box set.
Yeah.
And I've started watching it again.
Yeah.
And I've because now I know him, I'm watching it more closely, and he is a man who deeply cares. And he was given, he did not have a lot of fun making, he was under a lot of pressure. Sure. And but he took everything that I think he's actually a great creative because he thinks so much about this. And he's a huge fanboy. I mean, he loves Macross, Robotech, the first story, Lynn Min-May and the SDF-1 and Roy Fokker, and he loves that. That would be his dream. If he could make a Macross TV series, he'd be in heaven. And he had to deal with a lot of politics. He had to deal with a lot of difficulty. And what he was really interested in is telling a great story. Yeah, and he comes from the Berman, the Berman era of Trek, Brandon Braga. And
well, as we know, like, when we see good product out there now, it's only because somehow, some way, somebody's figured out a way to navigate that stuff. It's when we see truly great stuff in this particular era of with the studios being the way they are and the networks being the way they are. It's almost a miracle that we're seeing it, because somebody's had to fight that fight that battle, navigate those treacherous waters, and it's fascinating. I haven't seen the 12 Monkeys TV series, but I have a connection. I love that the Gillian film, and
well, Stashwick's in it, and he plays this like a rebel leader kind of a character.
That's
and
cool.
First of all, Todd told me that I met him at a party I went to with Nikki Griffin, somebody who I adore. I met her working on Femme Fatales. It's like 10 years ago. That guy, even though I've never met him in the flesh, that dude is so one of us. He's like I think he's a fucking phenomenal actor, first of all.
Yeah.
And he comes.
I just found out that he's friends with, Brian Ward?
Of course, Brian Ward.
Yeah, he's
formerly of Anchor Bay.
Friends, right, exactly. Those guys are best friends. Like, he's known them for years, and it's fascinating when you are in this industry. It's fascinating to see how, when you find people like that, you realize the connections are a lot tighter than you ever realized. It's interesting.
Well, I look at someone like I meet a Todd Stashwick. I'm like, I just want to make a movie and put him in it, just to hang out with him on set every day. Totally. I mean, he's a total D&D, Star Trek. He's a complete utter nerd.
Yeah.
But his training, he's from Chicago. He did the whole Second City, the whole comedy improv.
Yeah.
And it's funny because if you look at his IMDb, he's been on a million different shows.
Tons of stuff. Yeah.
But he's like one of these guys that he's a leading man that no one's ever bet the farm on to be the leading man.
Yeah.
He's been part of shows, but he's the guy that should be. He could be what James Spader was to Boston Legal in The Practice.
Yeah.
Todd Stashwick, he could be that kind of a guy.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to go back. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that show, because the funny thing is I my connection to 12 Monkeys is my father-in-law is the police officer in the Terry Gilliam film that chases them all throughout the film, and he's the guy that Bruce Willis punches at the end of the film. That's my father-in-law. And so it's like, I've got, I have this connection to the material, and I love that film. And I've always wanted to, it's one of those shows that there's so many TV series now that are, you want to like check out, but it's hard to find the time to do them all, because some of them were paywalled and some of them were, maybe that show was on when I was really into Battlestar Galactica and other shows. And so you just didn't, you kind of overlooked it. And that's one I've always wanted to go back and watch. And I may have to do that now.
Well, listen, since there's been a lot of interesting super chats and tips that have come in that I'd like to throw your way.
Yeah, let's do it.
Starting with Smell Then Sing says, Picard's season 3 Worf is reminiscent of TNG Spock. He's fully synthesized and resolved his conflicting origins and is now forging his own path. Thanks, Rob. Well, I think that's a great analysis.
That's a good observation.
That's exactly. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Worf. When we see Worf now, he's a much more complete being than we've ever seen him before. He knows who he is. He knows who he is. He knows what's worth fighting for.
It's also because, like Spock, he's been amongst aliens.
Yes.
He's not out there with the Klingon Empire. He's out there. He was raised by humans. He joined Starfleet. Right. Then he was stationed on Deep Space Nine. And first of all, how fucking awesome is Michael Dorn this season?
Yeah, he's so good.
The makeup is, you got the Worf makeup, and Terry talked about him being Pai Mei from Kill Bill, and Dorn.
And it's so good.
And Dorn is classic. He knows his classic cinema. He's a huge movie fan.
Yeah.
And he's playing it again, giving him the Worfisms. That opening line when he says to Raffi who he is and introduces himself, and then ends with a chamomile tea. That might be the Worfist, Worfian Worf language that nice. And it refers back to the 3rd season Next Generation episode Survivors. Nice house, good tea. And it's because we know Worf is a fan of tea all the way back to the 3rd season of TNG.
Right, and also the music he's listening to, right, is if I'm not mistaken, that's the same music Picard listens to in a couple of the films, right? So clearly, you can see Picard's influence on the course he's taken. It's like that's what I love is there was a moment in I think it was the first episode where Riker and Picard are first on board the Titan, and they're in the bunks.
Yo, I love that. This is so
Yeah, and
humiliating.
the dialogue in there where Riker says, "That reminds me of my cadet days, except I don't remember having to get up and pee so often." It's like, that just the stuff like that, and stuff like the tea and stuff. It just speaks to the life experience, the rich life experience that these characters have, and it's like these actors are so good, and they know these characters so
So
well.
I mean, again, can we talk about the acting? Frakes directed this episode.
Yeah,
And he's such a great. It's funny because, I just watched him on the Michael Rosenbaum podcast, and I recommend everybody
I
watch
saw
that.
too, yeah.
Inside of You. That's such a great podcast because Rosenbaum's able to he's so good with his. But Frakes,
Rosenbaum, by the way, who played Lex Luthor on
yeah,
Smallville.
on
For those who
Smallville.
don't know.
Frakes was so good on that podcast. And, I was lucky 10 years ago working with Roger Lay, interviewing them. I got to sit down with Frakes, and he was for 4 hours, and interview him. He was so great. I mean, he's just such a great guy. But his acting, it'll never win. Star Trek will never win Emmy Awards for acting because the industry has but I'll tell you something. Jonathan Frakes he's never been better. Ever.
No, I agree. And as you say, while he's directing, and the interesting thing is I don't know if it was on that podcast you're talking about, or if it was on the Ready Room, but where he talked about how, a lot of times, because he directs a lot of Star Trek, a lot of episodes, and he's kind of the liaison for any other directors that come into Star Trek. He helps get them up to speed, that kind of thing. And he talked about how, shooting the bridge, for example, is really daunting for a lot of directors who are not used to it, and they feel very constrained by it. And Frakes is like, oh man, the bridge that's my favorite, because there's so much, there's so many angles you can do. There's so many ways you can use the camera in that space to show the crew at their best and to show them. I mean, it's really wonderful. I mean, that the bridge of the Enterprise or of a starship is very much, like a stage in theater, and you can really fully exploit it in a lot of interesting ways. And Frakes gets it. And yeah, he's doing all of that while he's acting, and it's really remarkable.
Jan Michael, and forgive me, Jan Michael, Zulu. I'm sure I massacred your last name. It's Szullew. Zulu, I guess. Says, I don't think anybody noticed. Maybe I missed it. But Shaw's authorization code is 1211. That's Terry Matalas' birthday, December 11th. By the way, Terry's 47 now. He's a kid at heart. That's all I know. And he's a very sweet guy. And by the way, I'll tell you something. The first time I met Terry in person, I recognized him. I was going into the John Williams concert at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
And he was standing there in the merch line to buy his young son a shirt, and his young son already had a shirt from a previous John Williams concert. So, and his son is like the nicest kid in the world. Cool. So, again,
cool. I mean, it's got to be cool for him to, I mean, obviously there's a lot of pressure to be a parent and also do the kind of work he's doing, but it's got to be cool to share the love of all this stuff with his kid. I mean, that's neat. It's great to see that he's doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hulk Hogan giant taint. That's got to be a big taint. Picard season 3 has been great. TV writers make a huge difference. By the way, I see that you and Gary Beekler Nerdrotic had dinner with Terry. I hope it went well. I'm surprised Terry is allowed to acknowledge the fandom. Well, here's an interesting thing. I would say this. What I find really interesting about, look, for all of the disparate opinions and all the YouTube pundits and the different approaches we have to things, we are first and foremost fans. Yes. And we were fans because we have a great love of cinefantastique. We're all imagination connoisseurs. And what we're all looking for is great characters in stories that are well told. And, I'm more diplomatic, I think, than a lot of other people. But what's really interesting, and a lot of the world, Gary Beekler liked Picard season 3. the critical drinker, like Picard season 3. The Red Letter Media guys are coming around, and God bless them. I love them so much. Mr. Plinkett's review of Generations changed my life and made me a lover of that forever, and of Red Letter Media. But all of these people, you have to ask yourself, how is it that all of these disparate members of the online fan community who have very different approaches, why is it we all love Picard season 3? And I'll tell you what it is. We weren't paid off by the studio. I can tell you that.
No, that's for sure. And I think Terry Matalas, I mean, I've only met him once. I've only, at the Picard premiere, and I've interacted with him a little bit on social media. I just think he got it. I think he knew, because he's one of us, right? He knew that there's a huge portion of the Star Trek fandom, the longtime fandom, that had really backed away from all of this stuff that Paramount is doing now on Paramount Plus. And I think he knew that this was an opportunity to kind of reach out to those people. And I think he, with the show and also kind of on social media, and to just say, listen, I get it, but trust us. We really are, this thing you love is in good hands, and we really are putting in the work and putting in the effort. And I know that you're not going to believe it when you first see it. You're going to doubt it, and you're going to not, you're going to think it's a bait and switch, but stick with it because it really is that. It really is the thing you want it to be. And that's what's really surprised me is I, as I was watching those first 2 episodes, I think I said this last week, I didn't I felt this thing inside me, like this energy, like, oh my God, could this be the really like actual Star Trek? And it felt like it. But the more you see that, like, you don't trust it at first, and then you get into it, you watch an episode, then you see a second one, and it just wins you over, because it never becomes that thing that you've been like offended by the last, for the last 20 years, for whatever reason, that it's, this doesn't feel like a poke in the eye. This feels like something where people really, they're telling a great story with great characters, old and new. It's not just about nostalgia. They're telling a great story with great characters, and they're putting in the effort to just respect the whole franchise, and to make sure that, look, you might look at this stuff, you might watch Discovery, or you might watch the first 2 seasons of Picard and go, this is all just, they're just making this shit up. It's all random. They're just doing whatever they want.
Well, look, when you,
it's easy to think that, but when you're watching this stuff that Terry's doing, and all the people, Dave Blass and the Akutas and Drexler, all the people they brought back.
Well, and also Dan Curry, who designed the Batleth,
right,
to create the large, and what did Dan Curry do? He gave you a larger size mechleth,
right.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is they've put in the work, man. They've put in the work, and they've put in the effort to say, listen, we love this franchise as much as you do, and we're going to honor it. We're going to ground this thing in that. It's not about Easter eggs, and it's not about all that stuff. They're all there. That's absolutely true. But in the foreground are great characters and a great story. And then when you dig deeper, you realize, oh wow, everything I'm seeing and hearing has been grounded in this world in a way that tells me that these people know it, they love it as much as I do, and they respect it. That's the difference. That's the only difference between what's happening now and what's been happening the last 20 years.
And that's what all of these online YouTube pundits are looking for.
Yes.
It's really weird, because a lot of people say, oh, it's nostalgia. And I'm like, look, this isn't nostalgia. This is, as a matter of fact, it's taking our characters, like all of us are growing older and we change. And this show is trying to ask the question, what do they're not trying to recreate something we remember from our childhoods. Terry and his writing team are saying, these are our characters now. They're not the same characters you knew 30 years ago.
Right.
They've grown. They've had life experiences. I mean, Riker lost a son.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a friend.
And he had command of a previous Titan, and he's moved on from that. Right. So it's like, that's the thing, is, look, you would be foolish to say that there is no element of nostalgia here. Obviously there's a fondness.
No, of course there is, because it's something that happened 30 years ago, and you're meeting them now. But
that's exactly right.
I have a friend here in LA who a couple, some of the nicest people in the world, and my friend's one of the most talented guys I know. They had twins, and they lost one of their twins. And when it was happening, I didn't even know how to respond to it all.
Yeah.
And they had another child, and they have a family, you know, of four, and they overcame what is the most horrible adversity I think anybody can have. And within all of that, they're still the nicest, sweetest people you could ever possibly meet.
Right.
And you know, but they went through that. They felt the worst kind of pain I think a human being can feel, which is to lose a child.
And I think for younger people especially growing up now, I mean, I can't imagine what it must have been like to go to high school and have your the two biggest years of high school, junior, senior year or whatever, just erased for you. Like, I get it. And obviously people are, you know, there's climate change and political turmoil, and there's all the things that are going on in the world. And I get it. Pandemic. I get it. It feels like the world is awful, except that when you live long enough, you realize, man, like, again, we grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? And there was, you know, there was the Cold War was
Duck
on.
and cover.
Right, duck and cover.
If you see the Flash, duck,
right,
cover.
And you know, there was a massive recession going on at the time, and it was, you know, the Vietnam War had just ended, and there were all kinds of things going on then too. But you know, the interesting thing is as you get older, you realize, you know, you start to lose friends, you know, people you love start to die.
I have lost friends. I've lost relatives. I mean,
parents.
My sister-in-law was killed, and she was my assistant, my personal assistant, when we were working on the Chronicles of Narnia, and you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I watch, you know, my grandparents died, my stepfather passed away, you know, Sarah, my wife, her parents, you know, have passed away, and it's like and I've lost friends. I mean, when you start losing people who mean everything to you and are part of this grounding that you have growing up, it changes who you are. It changes who you are, and you have two choices. You can either become really bitter and really resentful and really dark, or you can go, this reminds me what's really important in life. And, you know, the things that really matter to me, the things that it's very clarifying as you get older and you realize, and also as you get older, you maybe start having a health scare or two that are just natural as you get older. And it clarifies what's really important and what's not. And so much falls away as just trivial and unimportant when that starts to happen. And I think that's the thing. I think that as you get older, you appreciate this stuff a little bit more. And I've had, in terms of pop culture, I mean, I've had periods where I just had to walk away from the things I love. I mean, Star Wars frustrated the hell out of me. There was a period where I just walked away from it for a while. Star Trek, the last 20 years has been like, I just can't do it. I have to kind of walk away.
Oh,
but doing that is clarifying. I mean, I'm also a Minnesota Vikings fan, right? And so like, I just had to, I was too into it. I was getting too worked up about this stuff. And I just had to, for a couple of years, just walk away from it completely. And then what happens is you gain perspective and you gain sort of peace. And then you start to remember why you loved it again. And then you're a little more open-minded, and you can forgive some things, and it's clarifying. But these are things that happen as you just get older naturally. And all of us go through this. Everybody's watching this has either gone through this, or you will go through this at some point in your life.
Well, in a way, it's what all Star Trek fans have gone through.
Sure.
You know, even with Picard seasons 1 and 2. I mean, look, from a production standpoint, I understand that in order to do this, you have to get Patrick Stewart, who's also gone through his own life, to come back and do this show. And in order to do that, you have to give him as an actor, we'll do what you want. And so what he wants to do is, of course, everybody wants to make something their own, which I find interesting. And to me, I've always thought that if you work in storytelling, you have to make the story, you're working for the story.
Yes.
And as an editor, I've learned this, and I actually learned this, the first time I learned this was in advertising. I worked for a company called Jacobs and Gerber, and I ended up luckily saving, through my editorial work, saving an ad campaign they thought they were going to lose. So they basically gave me the job to create all of these promos, these commercials. for the CBS Evening News. And I had literally, they gave me a line of a copy, which was, "Have you seen your country today?" And it was after Connie Chung and Dan Rather split up. And so they gave me this thing as a Hail Mary pass, and I cut together this thing that they bought off on. So I suddenly got very, very, very attached to my 30-second and 60-second promos. And they're like, they want you to cut 5 frames out of this. I'm like, what?
Right,
I'm a genius. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
And then I realized it wasn't my spot. It was the client's spot.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly
working for the client. And I had to make, and that's when I realized, oh, okay. And then I transitioned from then to cutting low-budget feature films with first-time directors. I was their editor and I was their post supervisor.
Yeah.
And I realized I was really good at saying to them, because the director's like, this movie's 3 hours long, it's perfect. And I'm like, no, it's going to be 98 minutes and then it'll be perfect. And they would look at me like you're crazy. And it was all about, let's make the story work. The story has to work. My idea isn't important. Your idea isn't important. Collectively, though, we have to make that story work.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's take, nowadays Hollywood is driven by, everybody wants their ideas in, and I'm like, you need to learn to look at the story, and your ideas must be subordinate to what the story needs, and that is a skill you have to learn. What
you don't want to do is you don't want to put your stamp on something. What you want to do is use your completely unique talents to make the thing the best it can possibly be.
Yes.
That's the key.
And
as the editor of the Digital Bits for the last 25 plus years, I learned a similar thing. If I'm writing, I can always, I'll get my perspective. I'll write a review, anything like that. I'll always write 30% more than I need. And you can be very precious about that stuff. That's the first instinct, right? But then you begin to realize, if you can say something in 1,000 words, you can probably say it much more effectively in 500, and you can probably be really maximally effective in like 200 or 300 words. The most clear, the most on point, and that's the thing, is you've got to serve whatever the intent of the project is.
Do you know, when you talk to Terry at length about this, you know what you don't hear a lot of from him?
Yeah.
I this, I that, I wanted, He doesn't talk that way.
Yeah. And the best filmmakers and directors understand that. And I think you can even argue that understanding that Terry has actually is woven into the season. It plays very much a part of
that was my point. I mean, he's always referring back to other stuff, like, because of this, we had to, and I'll tell you something, the guy, he was involved in the music. He was involved in every aspect of this, but it's
that little attention to detail that's what really makes it great.
Yeah.
I totally, that's very, very important.
But
as you said, it's not a selfish thing.
Nope.
It's how do we make this the best experience it can be for everybody?
And when you meet him, just talking to him, he's always like, well, what did you think? That's the whole thing. I think that's why we became friends, was because he actually respected what I'm like. That's something new for me. I would have thought my respect for Star Trek would have been, but he was like, well, what do you think?
Right. And I think that one of the most important things.
And then he never believed me when I told him it was awesome.
Right. The thing of it is I think if you're going to put someone in charge of a very valuable and important and beloved IP, that's exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who's not going to just remake it in their own image, but you have to put someone in there who just, it's like, how do I make the best thing of this that I possibly can? How do I be true to it? How do I honor it? How do I respect the fans and respect what's come before, and yet give them something new, but not just give them something new because I want to give you something new. Give them something new because I want to give you what you don't know that you want. Right? That's the key. You want to give something great and new that is exactly what you want, but you didn't know it.
Right. No, I agree.
And that's the challenge of a good artist, but especially in a commercial space, like in the film industry or whatever, where you're dealing with these multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar.
Well, the risk is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest problem with the industry right now is they've made it so everything costs
Yeah.
10 times what it needs to cost.
Yeah. And
And
nothing makes a profit domestically. It's got to be made for everybody all over the world, because it's not going to make a profit until it goes to China or wherever else. And
well,
it's
but the problem is all the tools that people need are very laborious. Computer graphics are fine, but you still need people to make them.
Oh yeah. Well,
And
you remember in the 70s and in the 80s, especially, you would look at a film like Star Wars or Indiana Jones, and there'd be one visual effects company that did the whole film. Now you look at the credits of these big blockbusters, and there's like 100 companies.
well, to me,
they just one shot or whatever.
but I think it's like, okay, we're gonna build a set. We're gonna shoot on in front of it, like is Marvel. It's all gonna be, there's a green screen behind us and some foreground elements. The problem with that is that means every shot is a visual effect.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have to composite backgrounds and all that, which I'm like, isn't there a way, like from an independent filmmaking perspective, I'd be like, so isn't there a way where we can rely more on close-ups and foreground objects and keep everything close and then give you one big giant master to convey the quantum realm? Does every shot have to have computer generated backgrounds in it?
Yeah.
And I think nowadays no one knows how to do that. No one knows. No, they have lost the ability, because now we have all these things. It's just now par for the course.
And I think that was, it's funny you mentioned that, because you and I obviously love Battlestar Galactica, Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica, but then when Blood and Chrome came out, it felt very much like that. Everything felt virtual, everything felt like a visual effect, and it just lost that thing that the show had, that handmade like thing where when they were on the Galactica, there were no visual effect shots when they were on board the Galactica. It was all practical. But suddenly, Blood and Chrome, everything was a digital environment, and it felt like a digital environment. It just didn't have the authenticity that Battlestar Galactica had. And I think you see that with a lot of, it's interesting because you look at Star Wars now, some of the, like Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, as much as I enjoy those shows, it feels like sometimes a giant visual effect. When you see a character standing on the desert of Tatooine, it doesn't feel like they're actually standing in a desert. But then you watch Andor. Right, exactly. They're in that virtual volume. But then you watch Andor, and that everything about Andor felt authentic and real, and like they were in a real place, because they actually were. And there's something to that. Visual effects are amazing, but they're still not good enough where they're indistinguishable from reality. I mean, and maybe they'll get there at some point, but there is an authenticity that the brain recognizes when you're in a real room with real objects.
Did you watch Mandalorian, the season 3 opener?
Yeah. I
hated it.
It felt like a filler episode. It felt like,
why didn't that episode open with first of all, the Mandalorian? Here's everything wrong. Look, I love everything in the Mandalorian,
right?
But I hate I hate the writing, and I hate how it's presented. So
it feels, well, for example, it feels like, why do we have to keep going back to Tatooine in every season?
How about
in the original film, when 3PO asks, "Where am I?" Luke says, if there's a bright center of the universe, you're on the planet it's farthest from. That was the whole point. Tatooine was nowhere, insignificant. And now somehow, for some reason, in every season of the Mandoverse, we have to go back to Tatooine, and it's like,
well, how about this episode? So we're in the Mandalorian system. We're going to go retake Mandalore or whatever. I'm going to go purify myself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka, Mandalore. And he lands to go see Bo-Katan in this giant empty castle. And it's like we have to walk down this long corridor. And we get to the end of the corridor, and there she is, draped over her throne.
Yeah.
She's
and
like...
is that just how she spends her time? Like all she does is sit in that chair?
I'm like, okay, Sal, I have the Darksaber, everyone's left you. Why don't we go to Mandalore and see what's up? like why? Like I would have. I looked at that episode and I'm like, here's how I would have opened Mandalorian season 3 if I was making that show. I would have opened it with, you're in space and you pan down just like in the original Star Wars, off moons or whatever, and you see the horizon, and maybe put a a thing up that says the planet Mandalore,
Right,
and
right.
you have the N1 whatever the starfighter come in, and Bo-Katan is in the little dome with Grogu. And Mandalorian is the
Or
Mandalorian Din Djarin is flying
yeah,
down, and you come down and you see the ruined surface of Mandalore, like cities is what Coruscant, whatever, destroyed, melted down, the
yeah.
most ravaged planet ever. And they set down, and the three of them get out and look at the devastation. That's
Well,
your
yeah.
opening moment.
Or you could simply like Mando and Grogu come down in that ship and they land and they get out and they see the devastation, and then somebody walks up to them and it's Bo-Katan and she goes, "You ready? Yeah, let's do it."
Right? Yeah,
Right? Like,
something.
why do we have to well, we got to get the band back together again, and we've got to go. Like, it's like, man, it's like just get right to the meat. You don't have to do this crazy filler. We've got
No.
to go on a mission to do the mission we really want to do. Like,
Yeah,
just get right to it, man.
and the dialogue and all. Anyway, I don't want to make this about
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
because we're
I get it.
but that's what I want to say. It was just like I watch it and I'm like, wow. And here's what's funny to me. So we've had three episodes of Picard, and already Todd Stashwick, a man that people didn't necessarily know, is a fan
Indispensable.
favorite, indispensable, total fan
Yes.
favorite.
And they did, and look, they didn't, they got right to the story. They got right to the story. No, there's no scenes here that feel wasted. They just don't. They're getting right into it, right into the meat of it, and they're maximizing every moment. It's kind of, so you ever watch Corridor Crew? I love watching the Corridor Crew. They analyze, their visual effects guys, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
they
yeah.
have this channel on YouTube where they analyze stuff. And they did a great video recently where they talked about the problem with the Cowboy Bebop, the live action thing. And they said, why did this not work when the anime is so great? That anime, Cowboy Bebop, is so great and so iconic.
So great.
And they broke it down. They broke down one little action scene, and it's like the live action show is taking just forever to set up a scene, and forever to get to the meat of the scene, and forever to convey the drama and convey information. Whereas you look at the anime, and in every single frame, they're giving you important information, and it's very concise and very quick, because they can't, obviously, in the anime world, they can't go shoot coverage of everything. They've got to tell you a story as efficiently as possible. And the anime is doing that, and the live action just isn't. And the live action consequently just feels lifeless. It just feels lifeless and dead. There's no energy in that at all. And that's kind of how I feel a little bit about some of what they're doing in the Star Wars universe on the virtual volume.
Oh,
versus out in the world.
It's been the worst. I think if you want to look how a volume stage should be used, everyone in House of the Dragon knows how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yes.
Star Wars, it's become a complete crutch.
Right.
Whereas on House of the Dragon, they were using the volume stages where people were meeting on the bridge to Dragonstone or whatever, and they would keep it in close up until they had to go to the wide shot, and then they would use an effect shot. They really know how to use the volume stages.
Because when you're on that volume stage, you should never even feel like you're on the volume stage.
No,
right? It should never feel like a volume stage. But then when they do these like live shots of a character in the desert of Tatooine, and it's just like it feels so obvious that they're not even actually there. Like in Obi-Wan, that scene when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are together at the end, it's like, this just feels like they're sitting on a stage.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel real.
No,
that was a tangent, but
total tangent. But I think yes. But another thing, talking about the production of Picard season 3, and this is something I need to ask Terry, but we've talked about before. This whole season, you could call it a bottle season.
Yes.
In that it's for those of you who don't know, a bottle show is television parlance for when you shoot a series episode on your standing sets, all the sets that you have built for the show. And the reason that you do that is so you can have money to do bigger things later, go shoot on location, or you've already used your money up. So you have to figure out a way to tell a story on the standing sets. Yeah. The Next Generation was very good at this.
Because they had to be, because they were doing like 24, 26 episodes a season, which today is like unheard of. I mean, it used to be 12 was kind of the standard, and then down to 10, and now some shows go down to like 8 and stuff. And,
Yeah.
but by being that economical with your production, then you've got money to spend in VFX, you've got money to spend on great actors, and Star Trek at its heart, as far as I'm concerned, and this is the main thing, Star Trek at its heart is a starship show. It's about getting out there on the frontier and exploring. That's the heart of what Star Trek should really be always.
Well, another thing, I mean, talking to Terry, getting to know him, like, again, I didn't know the guy 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But now I have his hat. Actually, he didn't make this hat. The pop guy.
No, I was going to say, I don't imagine Terry made that.
He's probably embarrassed as hell by this because he's a very humble guy.
Yeah.
But we discovered we have a mutual love of The Hunt for Red October.
Oh.
And as a book, it's great, but
that's a perfect film. That's a perfect film.
It is a perfect film. And that as an influence and understanding, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, 100%.
Everything
that and Crimson Tide.
Oh.
And to a lesser extent, Das Boot. I mean, Das Boot. I mean, that's yeah, absolutely. And again, those things are ensembles.
Yeah.
Hunt for Red October is a great ensemble
great
story.
It's a great, you have multiple submarines, you're doing, and it's so great. Tom Jr. Jackson, our great Tom Jr. Jackson, who coined the phrase "we are all goof people," says, "I love this episode. It was on a theatrical scale and it felt epic. So jealous you know where it goes. Bill, good to see you again on the channel."
Glad to be here, man. Glad to be here. And by the way, I've seen the first 6. I've seen the whole season. I've seen the first 6, and like I can't wait to see where this thing goes in the last 4. I'm dying to see.
I love that you don't know.
I nudged Terry a couple times, like, "Hey, man, is there a way that we're gonna be able to watch the last episodes?" I'm dying. It's just killing me. I'm dying to see the last 4.
All I can say is there's a way that we might be able to see the final episode that could be considered atypical.
Oh, yes,
and
yes, indeed.
If whatever I have heard rumblings of is coming to pass, you and I, my friend, we need to experience it in an atypical way.
Yes, we do. I've heard the same thing, and yes, me too.
Not
Absolutely.
saying what that atypical way might be, but if something atypical were to happen, we should be atypical and go see it together.
100%. 100%.
Because I would love that. P.F. Dennis he gifted 10 Burnett Work memberships to the channel out there. For those of you who don't know, if you haven't become members of the channel, bi-weekly we have membership chats, and we will be having one tomorrow. So if you're a member of the channel at 11 a.m., we have a membership chat where all the members can come together. I'm there, and we're there for usually 3 or 4 hours, and we just chat. You guys we all shoot the shit together, so it's fun. The Jughead from the UK. The Jughead says, "Hi, Rob and Bill. I'm looking forward to Creed 3 this Sunday. I hope the current rendition of Picard is a return to the glorious vision of Roddenberry, DC Fontana, and Berman. Love and respect from the UK." What do you think, Bill? Do you think Dorothy Fontana and Rick Berman, and I don't know about Rick Berman, he's still alive, we can ask him, but Gene, what do you think Gene Roddenberry would think of this season?
That's a good question. That's a really good question, because Roddenberry, God bless him, he introduced so much of what we love, but he also at some point was an obstacle to that thing growing, because of his kind of idea that, like, human beings, he didn't want drama among the cast, and at some point you do need some drama. You need that human, that kind of, it needs to be. I get that he wanted Star Trek to be an example of a utopian future. But I think what's more important than just showing the utopian future is showing how we can get to that utopian future, how we can overcome our current challenges and get to that future. And I think as much as, I mean, look, we all owe him a great debt, Gene Roddenberry. But I think there was a point at which I think he was an obstacle to that thing growing. And I get his point. I get his wanting to be very careful with it, because obviously we've seen in the last 20 years, we've seen what happens when people aren't as careful with this thing that we all love. But I think that, look, we all at some point, you bring everything you've got to something, and then you've got to kind of step back and let somebody else, step in, and if it's going to live and breathe and continue, it's got to be allowed to do that. And I think so. I think he might look at this and he might not love the direction Star Trek has taken, but I also have to believe that he would look at this season and he would see these characters and where in the journey they've been on. And I think that aspect, I think he would appreciate that. I think he'd also appreciate the fact that Star Trek is becoming more of that show of that better vision of the future, of people working together to make a better world. I think he would recognize that too.
And there's a famous, I put it up once on, I think on my Facebook page, where Roddenberry did talk about fan works. I want to say it's the introduction to, when Bantam was still publishing Star Trek fiction in the 70s, they were the ones putting out the James Blish novelizations of the series.
Yeah, Star Trek
books. The log books were Alan Dean Foster.
Oh, right.
They doing the animated show. But I mean, James Blish, like Star Trek 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the novelizations.
Yeah.
I want to say that when Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbraith published the first Star Trek, I want to say it was Strange New Worlds. It was a collection of fan fiction, but it was officially published, and it came out in 1976. Bantam put it out. Mm-hmm. If memory serves, Roddenberry wrote a great introduction to it, explaining about the fact that he loved that fans made it live and grow and do something new and unique.
There is literally no franchise in entertainment history that is more alive because of its fans.
Oh yeah, no.
I mean, this franchise wouldn't exist if not for the love and appreciation and care and dedication of its fans. And we've seen again and again throughout the history of the franchise how fan created things find their way back into the the live action canon. And it's that's important. Like that's also the other aspect that has been overlooked, is that you can't. Star Trek lives and breathes because of its fandom, and it must always bring new people in, but you've got to respect the existing fandom too. And I think the thing of it is if you just make great Star Trek, you'll win people over. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. You'll bring new people in, because we've seen that always. New generations of fans are always coming into Star Trek.
I think though that what's really interesting to me is I feel that society has changed a bit. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up as a kid, watching Star Trek, I aspired to be those characters. I gravitated to Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
But the thing about Kirk was he knew that he knew he didn't know everything. And he knew that he needed to have Bones and Spock with him as two best friends. He couldn't function without them.
Yeah.
Because they knew things he didn't know. And that was okay. And that was what he was the commander, because Dr. McCoy and Spock, I mean, they were not the leaders. They were support. And they all understood their roles and they could move forward together, but they needed one another. And I, growing up, and I also knew that they were way smarter than me. And I understood that I really needed to do some work if I ever wanted to be on their level.
Yeah.
And I knew also that I would never be on their level. And that was okay.
Yeah.
And I still wanted to aspire to be them.
That's the example that inspires you. That's exactly right.
And nowadays I feel that everybody wants to have affirmation about who they are now. I feel like we live in a society, and I don't know if this is necessarily a criticism, but life is hard. And the fact that each one of us in the cosmic infinitude of the universe, that we exist at all, is miraculous.
Yeah.
And yet, unfortunately, human beings take their own existence for granted because the way we're made, we can only see right in front of us. We don't have a mental awareness of the amazing infinitude of the universe that's all around us. So we can never understand how unique we are.
Carl Sagan's pale blue dot speech, right? Is perfect example of that. I'm always struck by how few people ever look up at the stars at night, ever go outside and just look up at the stars. And obviously, if you live in a city, there's so much light pollution now that it's hard to really do that. But I grew up as a kid in North Dakota, and so I could go out at night and just see the Milky Way. And up in parts of North Dakota too, you can see the Northern Lights when they're active, and
Yeah.
it creates this sense. And the other thing about North Dakota that's interesting is that's a landscape that's deeply a part of me, because it's very flat and there are not a lot of trees. So you can go out during the day and it's just you and the ground and the sky. And the sky will be filled with these huge just mountains of clouds. And it just gives you a sense. I mean, it's very much a part of who I am, that sense of like, we are all very, very small. And these things that we are so wrapped up in are such an insignificant part of the grand scheme of things, whatever that may be. And I'm very aware of that. I bought in the height of like when the pandemic was going on and all the political turmoil and with all the various elections and stuff. I actually, to relieve stress, I bought a telescope. I've got a big Dobsonian telescope. It's about as big as I am tall. And I take that out in the backyard, and it's great because.
And you've taken some great pictures.
Oh man, you go out there and you just pan around the sky, and it's just, you just lose yourself in that vastness. It's really remarkable, and I recommend it highly to people. But so I grew up with that sense of there is a much bigger world out there than just what's in front of my plate. And I think too often, especially when we're all like this, doing like this all day long, and so it's so easy to be like this, tunnel vision, to go down a rabbit hole and just lose sight of the fact that, man, there's a vast thing. There's stuff all around you, and that's what's really important. Not this. It's the stuff that's all around you that's what's most important.
Well, I mean, funny enough, I mean, what Star Trek did for me as a kid watching it was look outward.
Yeah.
And now our entire civilization with social media is about bring it to me. How does it relate to me? Make it about me. And we're making videos and TikTok videos and reels and Instagram posts. Me. And,
right. Here's me unboxing something. Here's me reacting to something.
Right. And
it's not in my nature to be like.
And look, I'm part of that ecosystem. I've always been, I've spoken at conventions for 30 years and all that, but it all began with me looking outward. I mean, my head is in the clouds. It's always been in the clouds.
Yeah.
And it's been difficult because I thought when I was a kid that I would be living in that Jetsons future when Spacely Sprockets is making stuff to go, like in Gattaca, where rockets took off every day, and you could look out and go, that was the world I thought I was going to live in.
But guess what's cool? What I'm so excited about now is that we're starting to be in that world, man.
I know.
I mean, SpaceX just landed 100 consecutive rockets. Not 5-6 years ago, the idea of even reusing a rocket was people. I remember the day before the Falcon Heavy took off and 2 of those rockets came down and landed. People said this will never fly. I watched NASA guys saying they're never going to be able to pull this off. And the next day, like we saw, and sure, Elon put a car on there or whatever, but like it was amazing because you could see it and the rocket opened up and there was a car with a little dude in there.
Dude, playing David Bowie in the vacuum of space.
Yeah. And it's like, my God, like that's the future I want.
And now, look, I'm not necessarily an Elon Musk sycophant, and you can say all the terrible things you want to say about him. He's a trust or whatever. The fact is, his leadership is the only person that made reusable rockets.
Not only that, but the whole world now is on a path to converting over to renewable energy. I mean, before Tesla showed up, the idea of electric car was a joke. I mean, a couple companies did it as a gimmick.
Right, and now everyone's and people can say, look, it doesn't matter that you have hundreds of people below you that are actually doing the work.
Right.
You need a visionary that leads the way.
And by the way, here's where you can say that matters. So right now, if you're a young engineer or a young rocket scientist or a young scientist or anything like that, the number 1 and number 2 places that those people from all over the world, the best of the best, where do they want to go work? They want to go work at SpaceX and Tesla. because the mission of those companies, it's not about making $1 billion and getting rich and buying a yacht and buying a secret island and becoming a Bond villain. It's about changing the world.
Right.
Whether whatever you think of Elon, that's another
Well,
conversation.
but again,
they're changing the world, and they're making that future. They're building that future, that better future that we wanted, and that's what excites me.
But again, that means you have to look out.
Yes.
And I think what I've seen that I find strange about the modern age, to me, technology, all this incredible technology, I can't believe the information I can find out at my fingertips. Google.
Oh, no.
I mean, it's funny counting the Google search is like a word or a thing. I'm like, I have to know what that is. If I had this technology now, that if I was 11 years old and had the cell phone I have now, and all the technology I had now, the movies I could have made.
Oh,
the things I could have done, and yet now we've created a society where everyone's like, look at me. I'm like, no. What about all the stuff we can create that isn't about me? And there are people, by the way, there are people that are doing it, which is fantastic.
100%. Yeah.
Fantastic. By the way,
hey, can I take a break while you continue to? I'll be back in just a couple seconds. I got to just run and do.
Yeah, go right ahead. Go ahead.
I'll be right back.
Bill will be back. I'll do some super chats. Our friend Alexander Wilson asks me, Rob, your friend Quinn Snyder just signed a 5-year, $40 million deal to be the coach of the Atlanta Hawks. Is he making too much money to come on the show? Okay, for those of you who don't know, I grew up on Mercer Island, Washington. Don't hold it against me. But in my neighborhood, a couple streets away, Quinn Snyder lived. And I went to kindergarten with Quinn Snyder. I went to elementary school and junior high and high school with Quinn Snyder. Quinn Snyder was one of the nicest people I grew up with. He was also one of the smartest. He was a 4.0 student, and he was incredible at sports. He was both great at football, but especially basketball. He led our basketball team at Mercer Island High School to win for the state basketball championship in 1985. He then went to Duke University, and his career, he's been a coach at Duke. He's coached the Utah Jazz. So apparently, I did not know this, he just signed a $40 million deal to be the coach of the Atlanta Hawks. Is he making too much money to come on the show? I've tried Alexander. I've told Alexander Wilson I tried to get him to come on the show. My problem with Quinn is, obviously, I haven't talked to him in years, and I don't have a direct conduit to him except through one person, and I keep forgetting this because, Alexander, you've reminded me. And there's one person, and I'd love to have him come on the show and talk about this, and I think he would talk to me. I think if he knew that I wanted to talk to him, he would talk to me, and I will look into that. Mega Reacts says, Episode 3 was the weakest of the season so far. Riker talking about moving planets to save his child is also just funny after season 1. I still have hope for Picard, but it's fading fast. Well, Mega Reacts, I'd have to say, both Bill Hunt and I have to completely disagree with you. I don't agree with that at all. I think Picard Episode 3, 17 Seconds, was a great episode of television, of Star Trek, and of this show. So, but that's again, we all are hit by things differently. So, but I appreciate you writing in. I appreciate the support, man. And but you and I, we park our shuttlecrafts in different shuttle bays on that one. Jessica Tennis says, I'm living in Raleigh, North Carolina. Deep Space Nine never aired at the same time. It was treated as filler to fill out our schedule. I remember watching 3 a.m. Saturday at times. Well, Jessica, that's a bummer. But let me just tell you, I hope, obviously, that I would assume you're a Deep Space Nine fan. And if you are, you should be, because I love that show. But if you're a Deep Space Nine fan and you know the episodes, let me just say you're going to keep watching. My man, Martino Simone, who, by the way, I owe voiceover to. I keep saying I'm going to get it done. I swear to God, I owe you voiceover, and I owe you a great deal of money. And don't think I've forgotten. I'm going to get you both. And the voiceover, though, I can get you this weekend. So Martino says, it's so good to hear you gentlemen talk with pleasure about good Trek. I'm telling you, it's great stuff. By the way, Martino does Play Trek, which is how you just got to see it. You got to see what he's done. I didn't grow up with Playmobil in the U.S., but Martino has serviced all of that. He's made sure that I have been flush with the greatest Playmobil displays. The Enterprise, the Bird of Prey, which I still don't have, the A-Team van, Kit from Knight Rider, the Aston Martin DB5 and Goldfinger, which you can't see them, but they're right there. My God, Martino, he is the man, and he has made these unbelievably creative and so much fun to watch episodes of, well, he calls them Play Trek, and you just have to see them. You will love them. So on this YouTube channel, look up Play Trek. It's its own playlist, and he has a new episode coming out. So Martino, he says, Bill is now back. Martino Sumoni, who's a great... oh, look at that. Is that Isis?
This is Charlie.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm just asking. I just want to make sure it's not Isis from Assignment Earth.
He's my coworker.
Are you sure that he doesn't turn into a person that you don't know, that you're not Gary Seven?
Well, he might be. I don't know.
Bill, George the Giant Slayer, who's another YouTuber who has a great channel who I've streamed with. Very smart guy, also a very astute analysis of story. George says, my mind was, by the way, a $20 super chat. George,
wow,
you were so generous. By the way, if you go to his channel, George the Giant Slayer, and you listen to his delivery, it's pretty great. You can't not watch his channel and fall in love with the way he presents his very astutely delivered analysis. But George says, my mind was blown by the last Picard episode. I felt bad about how Picard was treated at the end of the episode, but loved it. You were right. And the Troyan's opera homage from First Contact, all hail Robert and Bill. You called that the opera that Picard's listening to?
Yeah.
Before he turns off the yep.
It's so good. And I love that.
And by the way, Bill, how cool is it, George the Giant Slayer and you were not the only ones to notice the detail that has been woven in to Picard season 3?
Yeah, I love that. If you look closely, there's more and more stuff that you can lock onto and go, oh wow. Every little thing you see, stuff in the background is all correct. I mean, like for example, in the Ready Room on the Titan, there's the current Titan. There's the original. So the original Titan that was created for the Eagle Moss, right? For the books, for Riker's Titan.
That Sean Tarangio created.
That's exactly right. And also right next to it is the original Titan, which, if I'm not mistaken, was captained by Saavik.
Right.
Like, I mean, so it's like, I mean, when you dig into that stuff, you realize, oh my God, there's so much lore here that there.
One of my favorite things that hasn't happened yet, and I can say this because a lot of people are not going to get this, but there is an incredibly deep cut into the Reeve Stevens and William Shatner Star Trek novel, The Return.
Yeah. There's also
so deep. It's the deepest of the deepest cuts.
There's also a real deep cut that honors the Enterprise continuation novels too, and I won't say more about that. But let me get back to something we've already seen that we were just talking about. The whole idea of that Saavik was the captain of the original Titan, I believe in like novels or whatever in the fictional universe. So when Picard and Riker's shuttle gets destroyed, if you pause,
it's the Saavik.
That shuttlecraft was called the Saavik.
Yep.
And you can see its name on the debris,
and it flies right into the camera as it's flipping over. It's great.
And I didn't catch that. That at first, and then I went back and said,
it's there.
Yeah, it's so good, so good. Time for a little whiskey to honor the little Star Trek.
So good.
A little whiskey.
200 Watt Studio, a longtime watcher of the channel, and a person that does not want my love of To Live and Die in LA to ever manifest in 4K, but okay. 200 Watt Studio says, loved hearing Worf rattle off his houses and lineage. And it's so great that Beverly naturally got back into doctor stuff. I love that too. She's in sickbay helping people. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. She's who she's who she is. She's a healer.
And
right?
she's like,
that's what her son does too.
And she's like, concussive blasts can cause internal bleeding. She knows her stuff.
Because she's been in battles.
Yeah.
She's been in space battles before, whereas this captain on, the Titan, this crew of the Titan, they probably haven't been involved in a lot of space battles. Maybe none.
Right.
32 was Captain Shaw says like 32 missions and everything went off without a hitch. And so they probably never had a little adversity.
200 Watt Studio goes on to say, wait a second. Don't tell me I've only seen 3 episodes, but could the nebula not be a nebula, but actually a... You know what?
Don't say anymore. No more.
I'm going to say I'm not. What do I know? I don't know.
No, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. There's so much more going on than you've seen. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Michael Nemo said, I would have loved to have seen the Snyder Cut in the theater. Having said that, I'd sit for 10 hours in the theater to see Picard season 3. Well, you and I saw the first 2 episodes in the theater. And how great were they?
It really works in a theater. Let me tell you. And the interesting thing is we learned that the show it's finished in 4K, but the VFX aren't 4K.
Right.
But I was surprised by that because when you're watching it on the screen, it felt
well, even Marvel movies, the VFX aren't finished in 4K.
Right. That's exactly right. That's true. Right. That's totally true. And there's obviously 4K master because I'm sure the live action was 4K, and then the visual effects were done in 2K and then upsampled, and it's all finished.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I think so. But there will be. I'd be stunned if there isn't a 4K release of this season because Paramount is realizing how much money that they're making off of like the feature films in 4K have sold incredibly well.
And by the way, I mean, I have to tell you, I know that there was a problem with episode 2 in terms of people talking about how dark it is. I was watching episode 3 on my plasma, my old school's. It looks incredible. And when I first saw it and when I've watched it subsequently, it looks way too dark on my OLED.
Well, so here's the interesting thing. I think what was happening is that there are 2 masters, right? There's one for HDR TVs and one for non-HDR TVs.
Yeah.
So in other words, 4K and regular HD. And I think what's happening is there was some kind of a flagging issue. So what people were seeing on their regular high def TV, if they didn't have 4K, they were seeing that HDR, which of course is going to be darker. So there's little hiccups like that.
But I mean, and I know Terry said there was a mistake for episode 2, but episode 3 on my plasma, looks the way I saw it looked amazing. Yeah. It was not too dark. It looks so cinematic and so cool.
Yeah, and what's really cool is what's really exciting is obviously CBS and Paramount have been releasing the feature films in 4K. Well, now we just found out for the first time, the first season of Strange New Worlds is going to be released in 4K in addition to Blu-ray.
It's too bad. I wish I liked it enough to buy it.
I know, me too. But that show will look phenomenal. It'll look phenomenal in 4K with high dynamic range. But look, here's the thing: if it sells well, I've got to believe that Picard, they'll either release. I would imagine they'll probably just release a box set of the whole series in 4K. That would be the obvious thing to do. But everybody in the world is going to be, who's a Star Trek fan is going to be clamoring for this season in 4K. I've got to have it in 4K.
Me too. I mean, I hope I want it in 4K, Dolby Vision, HDR, all that.
Yep.
100%. Ryan Landis says, I know you'll miss Star Trek Discovery and all the hugs and the crying. No, I won't. What I will also not miss is the forward-thinking, inspirational storytelling of Star Trek, because I was never inspired by that show at all.
No. But, the thing of it is we do have to acknowledge that, like, it's not unlike what happened with the prequels and even the sequels in Star Wars, right? They might not be what we would have wanted them to be, but for a lot of people, younger people especially, that is the first experience of Star Trek and Star Wars they had. And like, I get it. Like, I get that there are a lot of people who love Discovery for all the reasons they do, including the fact that it's very upfront about representation. I get it. I totally understand why people love it. And why
Listen. To be clear, I have always said that. I've said that there are people that are going to come to Star Trek for the very first time because of Discovery.
Yeah.
I just wish it so wasn't mired in the politics of the day.
Yeah,
that there was an extrapolation.
The way characters talk to each other, the way the mannerisms are very contemporary, and I feel like that stuff's going to be very dated in a few years.
I also think it's not aspirational. It's trying to appeal that, we want our viewers to see themselves in our show.
Right.
And I'm like,
the thing of it is, if you're making great Star Trek, you can totally do that. You just have to actually make great Star Trek. And it's not, again, I've said many times, it's not the diversity. There are all these people out there who are like, it's too woke. It's like, what is woke is just a lazy criticism. I mean, to me, it's like diversity, representation. That stuff has been a part of Star Trek from the very, very beginning.
And it's stuff we want. It's stuff that that is something that our future needs.
Yes. The difference is you have to make great Star Trek. And what we've seen over the last 20 years just hasn't been great Star Trek. I can't wait. I'm hoping Paramount sees the light and goes, okay, there's a better path we can take here with Star Trek. And so these kids that have come to Star Trek through the current shows, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and the Lower Decks, whatever, we'll finally see a Star Trek that is made for them, but is actually really well made Star Trek. It's not a goof on Star Trek. It's not loosey goosey with all the stuff. It's like actually great Star Trek, and it has all of those other things that they want.
By the way,
you can absolutely do that.
I'll give you guys a spoiler, Bill, even you. Star Trek Picard season 3 ends with, you're going to say, I get to tune into that next week, right?
I hope Paramount and Paramount Plus see that and go, oh, this is the path we need to be taking. Like, this is the better path.
I would say this is the way.
Yeah, this is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
And all I'm saying is the end of Picard, when you guys get to the end of Picard season 3, you're going to go, oh.
I want to see that show.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And by the way, if I'm wrong, you can come tell me.
Fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed. It's the way I feel about this season is that if I'm hoping that they realize, I feel like Terry and his team have shown a better path that will keep all the younger fans and bring new younger fans in, but also bring in all the long legacy fans and bring everybody together. And I hope they see that.
By the way, hang on.
It's all about nostalgia.
I just want to say,
if not, at least we've got this season.
I just want to say, Boat Trek, Star Trek Picard season 3 does not end on a cliffhanger. Just so you know, it does not.
There's a legit satisfying.
Yes, it ends. I mean, it's a mic drop banger of an ending.
I can't wait.
But there is still, I mean, for astute viewers who might stay through the credits, you know how it is. Whatever.
I want to see the Worf and Rafi show.
Oh my God! How about
see the Titan show?
Worf undercover. Like how great was he? They're talking about a Section 31 show. You know, when Worf talks about, we work for interested parties, he's like, we have mutual, we don't know where people, well, wasn't Worf left, the here where, no, Worf's like, hey man, I'm working, you don't know who he's working for.
Right.
Like,
right.
You don't know. Michael Nemo says, one of the differences between Discovery and Picard season 3, I'll bet Shaw would be dead by now on Discovery. Oh, they would have killed him in that episode.
Right. As an example of, oh, he's terrible, right?
Yeah,
Right.
seeing Shaw bloodied and whisked away was kind of difficult to watch, jerk or not. Let me just tell you, Stashwick, that guy rules, and you will see more of him. He is not down for the count.
And he still contributes. He still makes really important contributions all throughout. Yep. I mean, it's not over yet, not by any means.
Nope. Geek Filters says, "Great to see you outside of DMs, Bill. This is a fun conversation."
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy this, but we were talking about before the whole idea of like, here's me, look at me on the internet. Like, it's so not in my nature. Like, I would so rather be making content and digging into things and finding out stuff and sharing it with. It is not my natural state of being to be up in front of a crowd, like talking about like, here's how awesome I am.
Yeah, but we are celebrating somebody else's and other people's work.
100% we are. And like, look, this is the kind of a conversation that you and I would be having
on the phone anyway, which we do have. Right. Every time I talk to you on the phone, I'm like, why wasn't I monetizing this conversation?
That's exactly right.
Why not?
And that's what's fun, is to let people in on these kinds of conversations.
Well, I mean, and you and I, to be fair, when you and I were working on the Axonar project, we spent many, 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 many hours trying. We thought we were going to make, even though it was fan funded and very small, to make a Star Trek movie. Like, we were immersed in it for a number of years. And by the way,
it's like, okay, if that's the case, then let's just try and make the best one we can. Like, it's not, it's not about like arrogance or ego. I mean, unlike some parties that were involved, but it's just like, let's try to make the best Star Trek film we can, because this is fun.
That's it. I'm glad you said that. I was about to say, we were having fun.
Yeah.
And you know what? How great is it to be able to point to someone like Terry Matalas and go, they get it. I mean, they would have liked what we were trying to do.
100%. I mean, that's the thing. It's like,
even the person we were working for didn't like what we were trying to do.
Right. You recognize people Terry's like us, right? He's that guy. He's like us. He's fighting the good fight, and he's trying to make great content. And God bless him, he's obviously got the patience of more than me.
Job. Because one day I'm going to make my great Job movie. Terry has the patience of Job.
To deal with all the politics and all the internal stuff and the studio stuff and all, to navigate that. But it's like, he, at the end of the day, he's one of us, man. And then you can tell Stashwick too. I mean, it's like they're just trying to make great. They love this franchise, and they're just trying to make great Star Trek, and God bless them, they've done it.
Yep. I think so. 200 Watt Studio says, don't spoil anything, but does this season relate to any of the Trek novels? Well, 200 Watt Studio, there's a very oblique reference to the novel The Return, but I wouldn't say novels exactly. They didn't rip off Dorothy Fontana like they did in Strange New Worlds, that they stole things.
Right. But there are just little things that you see that make you go, oh, okay. It actually makes some things in novels canon. But they don't ever explain it. They don't ever get into it. But they're just little things you see that when you think about it, you go, oh my God, if that's there, that means that this other stuff is part of the canon now. And like, that's really satisfying.
I will say this. They do a lot of, here's another great thing of what I love about the show, is next week in episode 4, you learn about the use of a time-worn device, I would dare say a storytelling cliche, that was introduced in the Next Generation, a certain thing that the Enterprise D had on it, that was actually originally introduced in the animated series, a certain place a lot of people went, that they used to create a lot of storytelling. They actually added something to that time-worn element of the canon that had never been mentioned before. And this is what I love about the show. They gave it an extra use and had a very good reason for doing so.
Yeah. And when you hear it, you just go, oh yeah. That's perfect. That's exactly
and
right.
It was so, when I was like, oh, and for me being a canonista, when they do something like that, it shows that real thought was put behind. Even a well-worn Star Trek trope can be plussed, can be made better, can be in the estimation of fans like, oh my God. When I heard that, I was like, I never thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched it. I showed, so I've, because I have press access, I have had friends over to watch.
What, Bill?
And that, when that moment happened, one of my friends turned over, looked at me and said, oh my God, that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. And it's like, yes, it does.
Yeah.
These people
And
are
that's,
thinking.
I never would have thought about that, but it was
know.
brilliantly done. What's really funny is a lot of people are going to say to themselves, well, how does the,
it's not unlike, well, how does Jack Crusher have an English accent? Everybody said that makes no sense. And then you watch the next episode and you go, oh, okay. Right.
He was educated in Britain.
No, just hang on, because they'll get to it probably.
Yes.
They've really thought about everything. That's what's satisfying, is you realize somebody really worked hard. Terry and his team worked really hard to think about all of these details.
And they didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because they had to make Star Trek Picard seasons 2 and 3 concurrently. God,
that's amazing to me. That's amazing to do that kind of work in the little time they had, and to pull off what they've pulled off. It's pretty close to a miracle, man. This is a unicorn. It feels like a unicorn.
Nick,
Charlie agrees.
My great friend Nick from Echo Base Network says Picard episode 3 is my favorite episode so far. DS9 is my favorite Trek, and I'm glad to see the changelings coming back. I now know why you could not answer if there were any tie-ins to Deep Space Nine. Look, man, if any spoilers got out, the whole world would point to me and go, Burnett did it. That's all I'm saying.
Except that now there are lots of people who know.
Well, yeah, but for the last 6 months, when I've been saying you people should watch, what do you mean you people? I mean all of you people. I would have been.
When you said when somebody said that you were like the Paul Revere of this, it's like that's exactly right, because I'll never forget the call that you gave me, like, after you saw what you saw.
Oh, and you were the first person I called.
I know, man, and I was like, wow. If you are saying that, it's like, okay, I can't wait now. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, it was, but yes, I couldn't say any. If I had said anything really about Deep Space Nine, people might. I'm not gonna fuck that shit up. No way.
Yeah, no, I know. That's the thing, is you don't want to, like, this stuff is so good, you don't want to screw it up, man. It's like, I can't wait for people to keep seeing this stuff in every episode and go, oh my God, because that's how you should feel.
I mean, we talk about episode 4, but wait till episode 5.
Yeah.
and people have asked me,
and then episode 6.
People have said to me, they're like, well, Rob, if there's an episode we should watch to understand like what's going to happen, what episodes should we watch? And I'm like, well, there's one very specific episode of The Next Generation that you should watch for Picard episode 5, and I can't say what it is.
No. And the beauty of that is that after you see it, then you can go back and watch.
Yes.
And it'll feel
and
like...
And then episode 5 becomes even better.
Yeah. Yes.
It becomes even better when you... Because that was so good. It's so good.
I know. I'm that's the thing, is I can't... it's just so... It's this feeling of just sheer delight is such. I saw Mike Okuda and Doug Drexler were, like, posting stuff on social media this week, and Doug basically said, like, it's been years since I've really eagerly looked forward to
since 1966.
Right. It's like I'm just eagerly looking forward to every new episode drop, and I feel the same way, man. I feel like a little bit like a kid again. It's so great.
Well, what's funny is Mike and Denise, who I just adore, and I've known them for years. You can even see the picture. They had a Free Enterprise poster up in the art department for Star Trek back in the 90s.
Yeah,
I love them. I have all their books, and I work with them. I had the great privilege of working with them because of Roger Lay on the Next Generation Blu-rays and the Enterprise Blu-rays, and of course Doug as well. You know, we went and shot. We did the whole art department reunion, and we shot it in Doug's house.
Yeah.
For the Blu-rays, and Doug's late wife, the great Dorothy Duder, she cooked for us, and it was so joyous.
Yeah.
And to see them come back.
I know.
See how the L cars.
I know.
Come on.
Oh, I know. And the
L cars have never looked better.
The credits were a thing of beauty, man. With the First Contact suite, it's so great.
And by the way, I would encourage everyone, if you haven't yet, look very closely at the end credits of Picard.
Yeah.
Just look close, because there's a lot.
Cool. Yeah, it's fun. Like, because I don't obviously know those people as well as you do, but like Mike and Denise have been, bits readers since the very beginning. And I used to go to CES every year, and every year at CES I would see those guys because they were there looking at all the new gadgets and the new technology, and it's like, and it's they're fans, they're big animal lovers, and so my wife and I are obviously big animal lovers, and we share a lot of photographs and stuff online, and so we've gotten to know them for that as well. And Mike and Denise now are working on For All Mankind, right?
I was about to say that.
Which is another just amazing show that people should be watching.
And by the way, Denise never wanted me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. She's actually in the rec deck scene in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Just saying. Like, to me, that's like that makes her the coolest lady ever.
I know, yeah, like with David Gerald.
And Mike Okuda, his first job on Star Trek was actually working on Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home in '86.
Yeah, and he never stopped.
He never stopped, which is amazing. And again, Terry brought them back. And brought back Dan Curry.
Which is one of the greatest things. I mean, these people are the keepers of all of that knowledge. They're like the George Feltenstein, right, of Star Trek. George Feltenstein, referring to our friend at Warner Brothers who runs the Warner Archive Collection. He's the institutional knowledge of that studio. He knows all the films. He knows what's in the vault. He knows all the filmmakers who were involved in that stuff. And Doug and the Okudas, and I mean, these people, Dan Curry, these people are the keepers of that legacy. I mean, the Okudas literally wrote the encyclopedia of Star Trek.
The 2-volume hardcover slipcase encyclopedia that's right over there.
Why wouldn't you always have those people involved?
Honestly, it is so weird to me that, look, I understand at one point it was like, well, we don't want any Star Trek fans to work on the show or whatever. But it's astonishing to me that you would make anything Star Trek without the Okudas and Doug Drexler.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, in terms of, like, if you own an IP, like, and this is the thing, for an IP like Star Trek, I mean, now Taylor Sheridan has taken over Paramount Plus with all of the Yellowstone shows and everything.
And you know what? God bless him. Good for him.
Of course. I agree. Yeah. But Star Trek should have, I mean, I would say, there's a guy like John Van Citters, and he ran the merchandising licensing. Now he's in charge of the Trek brand. I love John Van Citters. I don't think he's a big fan of me now because of Axanar and all that, but I love John Van Citters, and John Van Citters made sure that the publishing side, especially of Star Trek, and until they had to destroy it because of Picard seasons 1 and 2, it was incredible, and Marion Cordry, and I loved working with them in 2012 to 2014. And they had people like John Van Citters, and thank God they retained him to understand why this stuff is important.
Yeah, and I think you've alluded to this before. The thing that drives me crazy about Paramount Plus is why the hell, when I sign on to Paramount Plus, like when you sign on to Disney Plus, there's a Marvel channel, there's a classic Disney channel, there's a Star Wars channel. Why the hell isn't there a Star Trek channel right on above the break? The moment you sign into Paramount Plus, there should be a Star Trek channel right there. That's one of your big franchises. I mean, if you want to have a Mission Impossible channel,
because there's nobody. What Paramount has always needed is a Star Trek executive.
Yes.
That's what they've never had it.
Star Trek needs its like someone who's like a Kevin Feige who can.
They've never had it.
No, they haven't, and that's a real problem.
And they don't know what that would look like anyway. So who are they going to hire?
Right.
Just saying. No, they would never do that, but they should. but they
But
never
they
would.
they need someone like that with that knowledge and with that love of the material.
The problem is they're never going to hire me. I'm not an Ivy League educated business degree person. I get that. I'm too much of a loose cannon, even though they should hire me because I'd make it my life's work. But the problem is there's nobody else in Hollywood like that exists. So there really isn't. And there's nobody that's had any kind of production experience that's also a massive Star Trek fan. I mean, I would say someone like Terry Matalas could do that, but Terry Matalas has other things he'd rather do too.
Yeah.
You know, he did the pilot for the new Escape to Witch Mountain series. I don't know what's happening with that, but they did the pilot. Right. And to be that kind of an executive, the executive culture sucks. I was hired at Paramount for a year as a Star Trek consultant back in the 90s, and nobody listens to me then. I mean, Marvel Comics, they took the license away from DC. Paramount decided, well, we can't have Star Trek over at DC because they're Warner Brothers. So we have to give it to Marvel. Right. I wrote like a 16-page, I still have it, when I was a consultant there, why they shouldn't do that. And I'm like, DC has done wonders with the Star Trek comic license. And of course they gave it to Marvel, and that was very short-lived.
Yeah. It's short-sightedness, and again, it's people who aren't. I mean, it's people who are. Look, they're well-meaning. But they've got a business degree, they've got business education, and they're how do we make a profit? How do we capitalize on our IP? But it's like in order to capitalize on your IP, you have to have somebody who knows and loves it. That's the bottom line. You've got to have somebody who really deeply knows and loves it, and it's not necessarily that they're a fanboy. But you have to have someone who has reverence of this and an appreciation of it and a deep knowledge of it in order to really do it right. We've seen that with Marvel. We've seen that, I think, with DC. I mean, it's like you have to have somebody who cares about it.
And it can't be a person that just says, "Oh, I love Star Trek. I loved growing up watching it."
Right.
It's like,
but
okay,
now I'd love to remake it in my own image.
Yeah,
like
you need somebody that looks at it as being sacrosanct, and you need somebody that looks at it as like being immutable history. But that's a tough thing.
Yeah. And I also think that with Star Trek in particular, Star Trek has been too often saddled with this need to make, we've got to make, every movie's got to make $1 trillion. It's like, no, that's not what Star Trek is. It's not ever.
Well, the J.J. Abrams movies, the Bad Robot films, they didn't make the kind of money they hoped that they would make.
No,
they spent way too much.
And there's a reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you can't make a great, I would say this. Here's a mandate. I would say the studio should do this. Star Trek, they've obviously created a theatrical marketplace, but the last 3 Bad Robot Star Trek movies cost way too much money.
Yeah,
Star Trek should never have cost that much. I would say to somebody, we'll make Star Trek movies, but our budgets are between $75 and $100 million.
Yeah,
and if you can't make a Star Trek movie for that amount of money, we're not going to do it.
And once you've proven yourself, if you're in a position where you say, like, look, I need a little bit more to do this one sequence in this film the way it ought to be, then
the way a TV producer would think,
right? Then you've earned the trust to do that. But there's no reason this franchise, especially now that you've got Paramount Plus, if Paramount Plus is your home of Star Trek, then you can tailor the whole franchise to that. And oh, by the way, you can make great Star Trek films for Paramount Plus, but you can also show them in theaters.
Well,
you can also show them in theaters.
Gosh, that's a great idea.
I mean, it's not really. It isn't rocket science.
I mean, I only say that, Bill, because you and I saw Star Trek Picard episodes 1 and 2 in the Chinese theater, the great TLC Chinese theater on Hollywood Boulevard, on their giant IMAX screen.
Yeah, and that was tremendous.
Wouldn't it be great if we could see more of it that way?
Yeah. By the way, what about Nicholas Meyer's, Khan miniseries? Like, I mean, you want to make a Star Trek film, make that Star Trek film.
But Bill, they're going to do it as a podcast.
Yeah, that's just insane. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What the hell? Honestly, every Star Trek fan in the world wants to see a Nicholas Meyer Khan film.
And by the way, having read those 3 scripts, did I send those to you?
No, you need to, because I want
Oh,
to read them too. I want
they're
to read them
great.
too. Yeah, I don't
They're
doubt it.
great.
That's the film people want. Like, I don't. That's the thing that's so befuddling about this. It's not hard to figure out what path Star Trek should take. It's not hard at all. It just, they've got to just have the trust to do it. But it's so frustrating. Star Trek it should be easy. It should be easy.
Um, Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I think a restoration of Deep Space Nine could be financially viable if they made some dope-ass extra features, and those features would only be available in the physical media box set. I'd bet that there's a lot of Trekkies that would pay good money for that. Unfortunately, Stubble, having actually done that, I can say you're wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, the Star Trek The Next Generation, the Blu-ray restorations, which I would maintain to this day, the restoration of Star Trek The Next Generation is the very best television restoration in the history of any medium.
Yeah, they really went all out. And Ken Ross at
And
CBS, they put their reputation on the line, put their money on the line, put their, wrote the check to make it happen. And somebody had to have the courage to do that, and he did.
that was Ken Ross, man.
Yeah, and
The Tony Soprano of network executives, who his home video experience goes all the way back to working for Andre Blay in Magnetic Video.
Yeah. But so the problem with that was, this was also a time where the studios were in the bad habit of, they would put like the first season of a show out on Blu-ray, then the second season of the show out on Blu-ray, but then the third season maybe they would do DVD only, and then the fourth season they would maybe they wouldn't do it all, and even if they were doing all the seasons in Blu-ray, then they would inevitably repackage them in a brand new box set. But that new box set would have new content. It'd have exclusive bonus stuff in that box set. And everybody who had actually put their money out to support the effort all along the way got screwed, because then the only way you could get that bonus content was in the box set. So a lot of like diehard fans learned that, okay, I'm not going to buy this. Season 1's out on Blu-ray. I'm not going to buy this. I'm not going to buy season 2.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait, because there'll be a better box set with a bonus disc, and it'll be cheaper. And it becomes this self-fulfilling cycle of the financing. Just every season earned less money.
And they wanted $100 for a season. They wanted way too much money, and I understand. Here's the reason. Okay, for those of you who don't know, the restoration of Next Generation into HD took 4 years and $12 million. They should have continued on. But nowadays, people talk about, first of all, using AI to upscale standard def is not the right way to go. It's terrible.
At least not now. I mean, there might be a point at which that technology actually really is
maybe
legit, but it's not yet.
Go to the negative. Always go to the negative.
Yeah.
And that took a team of people 4 years to do.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine would take $20 million. Voyager would take even more because of the CG work that would have to be redone. Right. I think they should do it. Because, I mean, my God, with the amount of money they're paying for these underperforming Star Trek shows, I haven't seen the social media interaction for Star Trek Picard Season 3 is way bigger.
Oh, man. Something related to Picard Season 3 is always trending on Twitter, man, like right up at the top.
Yeah. And people can say maybe Strange New Worlds, whatever, but I don't think so.
Yeah. That's what I'm really most curious about, and obviously Paramount is very coy about.
They've never released numbers.
No, but I've got to believe that the numbers for Picard are better than. I've got to believe that. I have to believe that, and I have to believe it's bringing longtime fans who just don't subscribe to Paramount Plus. I have to believe that there are longtime fans who have subscribed to Paramount Plus now just because of Picard Season 3.
Oh, for sure.
And also, the motion picture, the thing that Paramount Plus did, that was smart. Paramount Plus putting up the money to finish Star Trek the Motion Picture, the director's edition, that was so smart. And I've got to believe that there are people there who are going, this is interesting.
Again, but they don't have anyone who knows Star Trek and understands what's going on. I mean, Terry Matalas isn't doing Star Trek now.
Yeah. The stupidest thing that they ever did was to separate the TV from the film franchise, and CBS controls the TV and Paramount controls the films, but they kind of cannibalize on each other when really they should be operating in synergy and like, and it's like nobody really like. Obviously, CBS is doing their thing now with Secret Hideout, and the film franchise has just kind of languished, and they've just like not been able to figure it out. And it's like, to me, it's not a mystery, man. You have one person, one person or a couple people who are the in charge of this franchise and who know it, and you bring it all together.
I mean, to be fair, that's what they thought they were getting with Secret Hideout and somebody like Alex Kurtzman,
and he does that very well. Respect. I mean, he does that very well.
Does he?
Does he do it well? But I see that's.
I mean, look, J.J. Abrams was.
We talked about the idea of filmmakers who they have all the connections, they get all the jobs, they have all the technical skills, but they have nothing to say.
But here's the thing:
they have nothing to say.
There's a reason why the Force Awakens made $2 billion, and the Rise of Skywalker barely cleared $1 billion.
Yeah,
I don't think in the history of film has one filmmaker made one movie that started a new franchise.
Yeah, that
dropped $1 billion.
I know. And by the way, a lot of people put all of that onus on Rian Johnson, and I don't think that's fair at all.
No way.
I think Rian Johnson was saddled with the situation he was handed at the end of that for Force Awakens. I mean, by the end of Force Awakens, Luke has been stranded on an island for a reason we don't understand,
and R2-D2 has been under a tarp.
Right, and so I can is dead at that point, so we never ever get the reunion that every fan in the world wanted. Like it's. I mean, Rian Johnson.
No, I mean, look,
a really tough situation.
I mean, and people point to, but it made $2 billion. It made $2 billion because people wanted the franchise back.
Right.
But what J.J. Abrams did was he poisoned and destroyed a franchise with that movie.
Yeah, it definitely was a poison pill because it was clear that they hadn't thought out the story arc through all three films.
Of course.
And it was Abrams does this thing he always does. He's in love with the puzzle box. So we'll make a mystery. Where is Luke? And why is Luke where Luke is? And we don't know. And he hadn't thought about it.
First of all,
thought about it. And so suddenly Rian Johnson comes in and he's like, he's got to figure that out. And at that point, no choice he makes is a good choice. He can only do the best he can with what he's got.
From a storytelling standpoint, I wish I had my own son because I'd do an experiment, or daughter. I'd do an experiment on them. I'd show them Star Wars and go from Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens. After the evil is defeated, the Emperor is gone, Luke becomes a full Jedi, and then you go to The Force Awakens where the First Order has risen, there's still a resistance. Where's Luke?
To be found, right? Exactly.
I mean, that alone. And do you know what Terry Matalas did that J.J. Abrams didn't do on Star Wars? Terry Matalas said, okay, it's 30 years later, 25 years later, whatever you want to call it after Nemesis. Mm-hmm. What would happen to people? What does happen to anybody, any of us? What happens in intervening years when life takes its toll?
Yeah.
What happens? And Terry and his writing staff did that.
Right from the start, before introducing new characters, right? Like, and what Abrams does in that first one, he introduces new characters, and then we catch up with our. But it's like it should have been the reverse, and that's exactly what Terry did. Is we're meeting new people, new characters, and we're growing to like them and seeing them as dimensional beings, but only because those classic legacy characters are leading us into that, and that's the smart thing to do.
Why do we meet Max von Sydow's Lars von Secca, whatever? Who is that character?
Right.
Why are we meeting him in the beginning of that? How does Star Trek Picard season 3 open? With 20 years plus Beverly Crusher.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't know. Why does Force Awakens not open with Luke Skywalker?
Yeah.
In a situation where we see a whole thing where the dark side of the Force, it is terribly written. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what Lawrence Kasdan wrote, but I'll bet you if you sat him down and asked him, how much fun did you have with J.J. Abrams? But anyway, I don't want this to be that kind of show. We got to get back on track.
But you're right. It is. And that's just the thing is, look, every Star Wars fan wanted a reunion of these characters and didn't get it. Like
by the way, we all went. That's why it made $2 billion. And you know what? Even though we didn't get it, we kept going back. The Force Awakens to me is the greatest example of in entertainment history of an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
It is the beginning of, it is the most gaslit, abusive, horrible bastardization of an IP that's ever been done.
Well, and
And
the
that's,
crazy thing is the frustrating thing is you watch that film and there's so much of that film you feel like, oh, we're back in the world. Oh, this is great. Oh, but then it doesn't, like, that film dies once you cut to the, what is it, the not the new Death Star, what's the planet, I can't forget.
Yeah, whatever.
I forget whatever the name of it is. But the moment after, like, it
Somebody built a
what happens
planet destroying device that can only go on the horizon,
right,
so it can only shoot like this way.
Katana's place. Like, after we get to Maz Katana's place and have that scene, the movie, just the momentum of that film dies.
Star Killer Base, like
Star Killer Base, that's right.
Which is, it can fire a beam weapon that can change direction, so you can look at it and
right.
That film.
Right. By the way, yeah, planet rotates, so like, you know, like, you just have to wait until to shoot the target. You have to wait,
and you can only go where the horizon goes. What if you want to shoot down? Because you know, Star Wars, terrible.
But it's funny if you go back and watch that film. I really like. I mean, I really, as a viewer, I really enjoyed that film right up until the end of the Maz Katana scene, and the momentum of that story just dies right there, and then it has to. Because then they introduce Snoke and Star Killer Base, and you have to, like, you figure it's really it's such a, like, a weird thing. Like,
well, it also, you know what it is? No one actually thought to themselves, like, okay, here's the Star Wars universe at the end of Jedi. Mm-hmm. What would happen after that? Like, let's look into world history. Let's look into the human history of the Earth.
Yeah.
If a civilization falls, an empire is defeated. What would happen 30 years later? Where would we be? You know, where would our characters be? And assuming there are heroes and they built a new republic. And you know what's frustrating to me, and I've said this a million times, other people already did that. Like in the Dark Horse comics.
Yeah.
You know, there have been the Thrawn novels, there have been Dark Empire, and those
which by the way, now Disney is going back to those Thrawn books and going, oh, we have this Thrawn character. Maybe we should write, and he's now a big part of the future of this franchise. And it's like, well, why didn't you know that before? Like, why? Like,
well, because from the corporate level, you're like, okay, here's people. This guy's done this stuff, and we're going to hire him because of why. Yeah. And unfortunately, the custodians of the there are no people. Kevin Feige was one of the only people, and look, whether you like Phase 4 or Quantum Mania, the fact
has been a problem. But
Phase 1, 2, and 3, 23 films with an average gross of $1 billion is the most successful use of an IP in the history of storytelling.
Yeah.
Proof's in the pudding, whatever. Every single IP should have a Kevin Feige.
Yeah.
The problem is there's only one of Kevin Feige. And the way he came up, he interned at Donner. He's a singular. He worked on 14 Marvel projects before the MCU.
The other problem is these business school guys
that should be in charge of Star Trek. And this person would gladly do it. You got to pay him. And I don't know if you could pay him enough. But he does exist.
Yeah, you have to tell me who that is off.
I will tell you who it is off camera.
I'll be very curious to see if it's who I think it is.
And here's the thing. In the entire history of entertainment, there's only been one of this person. And they're already one of the most very high-ranking members of the Hollywood community in terms of the business. But they have been, through machinations, maneuvered into a cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And they should be running, but I'm just saying that person does exist.
The point is that there's a way forward. There is a smart way forward, but it just, people have to, you know, you marvel at some of these things. I don't mean to use a pun with Marvel, but it's like there is a way forward. There's an obvious way forward for, you know, that it amazes me how politics and studio, you know, ins and outs, and how some of this stuff so often gets in the way. But there is a way forward that would make that could reunite Star Trek, could reunite all Star Trek fans, could keep bringing in new fans, and it's not just exploiting the IP, because that's what's happening now. The IP is being exploited.
Yeah.
It's not, but you should need to honor it as well as exploit it, and you can do both, and there's a way to do it.
I agree. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, "Hi Rob, this is maybe a tough question, but what character from season 3 do you want the most from Exo 6? They're the company that makes Star Trek action figures. Personally, 3 episodes in, it's Worf. That casual outfit is cracking. Oh, let me just say, I might have told people, I'm not saying who, that that's exactly the character you should make."
Yeah.
So
100%.
Calvin Bowes, who I haven't heard from in a while. Calvin is, of course, the father of Braxton Bowes. Calvin is a longtime member of the channel. Calvin says Braxton is a huge Star Trek fan. He's met William Shatner at the conventions. He's taken pictures. He was 6 when he was watching this channel. Calvin says, his dad says, tomorrow is Braxton's 8th birthday. And he said he is glad he's getting great new Star Trek.
Good for him.
Calvin goes on to say, if Braxton does not like it, it's not real Star Trek. He likes Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks, and this season of Picard, all the rest of the new stuff is fake Trek. Well, Braxton, I have to say, to be honest, there's some good stuff in Strange New Worlds, and there's some fun stuff in Lower Decks, and Prodigy, you should watch Prodigy, I'll even say that. But Braxton, first of all, a very happy birthday to you. Happy welcome to 8. 8 is good. 8's a good year.
The future's going to be bright, man.
The future's bright, Braxton. So happy birthday, Braxton. And Calvin, good to see you. Aaron Harvey, longtime fan. By the way, Aaron Harvey literally wrote the book on Star Trek the Animated Series.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And he's an incredibly talented artist and designer in his own right. He's done covers for IDW. He's an incredible artist, a great guy, and a true lover of the Star Trek franchise. And I recommend everyone going to get his book on the Star Trek animated series. Aaron says, people talk about toxic nostalgia, but I think it's more of a yearning for when we could look forward to the future. We have lots of the gadgets, but not the society to support the positive future. That's a really interesting.
100%. He's right. He's right on the money. That's what like you see the things that are going on in the world today, and it's really discouraging and it's really frustrating. But at the same time, there are some exciting things that are happening. There are some very exciting things that are happening. But what we want from Star Trek is a show that focuses on that possibility and that positive future. And that's one of the reasons why I really liked Enterprise as a series, flawed though it was, because what interests me most is I don't want to see just the utopia or the dystopia. I'm interested in how do we get from here where we are now, which is kind of a mess, it feels like, to that better future. That's what interests me. That's where the hard work is. That's where the hard work of figuring out how to be humans can become better. That's where the rubber meets the road, man. That's what I want to see. That's the space I want to be in. And to me, it's all about working toward a better future that we can all be a part of and that we all want to be a part of.
Totally agree. By the way, I cannot recommend Aaron's work enough. Check out that book on the animated series.
He's a great artist. He's
a great artist, and he's a true blue fan. And he benefited from technology. He's a transplant survivor. You know, he has to think about that. And there's nobody who cherishes his life more than I know than Aaron Harvey.
Yep,
so
100%.
Support his work and buy his book, by the way. Blue Rock 1701. Did I read this? He says, watching Picard Season 3 as a lifelong Star Trek fan, it's nice to feel respected again by its caretakers. Will the season finale have a theatrical event? No man can say if you're a Citizen Kane fan. Wouldn't it be great?
The future is full of possibilities.
The future is where we shall live the rest of our lives, if you're a Criswell fan. I mean, all I can say is maybe somebody at Paramount might put it in theaters. I will say this, guys. I've always said that Star Trek Picard Season 3 is like a movie. It's like a 3-act structure. Episodes 1 through 4, Act 1. Episodes 5 through 8 are Act 2. And episodes 9 and 10 are and people said, Rob, does it have I would call it a whiz-bang, mic drop, smash bang, whatever you want to call it, finale. I would say that the end of Picard Season 3 it's like going to a county fair for the first time and getting that first caramel apple. And you watch it, you watch that big apple on that stick dipped in the molten caramel and twisted around and brought up as the caramel's dripping off of it, and some mutton chop dude hands you that big giant first caramel apple, and you look at it and you bite into it and you feel the caramel on your face and you feel the juice of that apple come down your cheeks and it tastes so good. That's what the end of Star Trek Picard Season 3 is like.
You're weaving quite a picture there.
There you go, man. I mean, it's like being at that country fair. I'm thinking about James Earl Jones. Baseball, Ray. People will come, Ray. The history of America's
been... The answer to the question is, stay tuned.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Well, there you go. Thank you. No alliteration, just stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
DWOMT says, Rob, what episode of Picard Season 3 do you appear as a Q and snap your fingers and wipe out all of modern Star Trek except for Picard Season 3? It'll be the best episode by far. Well, all I can say is I'm not an actor.
No.
So,
but you know what? I was thinking about this earlier. If you were like, let's say that you and I were magically given the reins. It's never going to happen. But I mean, what would you do? And I would be like, okay, everything that happened after the end of Enterprise to the beginning of this season, when Picard time traveled last season, he reset the universe back to the way back to the prime timeline, and Season 3 on is prime timeline, and everything else happened in an alternate reality.
You know what I would do? Okay, I love the Star Trek Litverse, and when they had a continuity going for 20 years.
Yeah, across all of the series.
All Star Trek, which I loved.
Yeah.
So what they did was Picard Seasons 1 and 2 destroyed that.
Yeah.
So they were just going to end that continuity. But the writers, James Swallow, David Mack, both of them are great Star Trek writers. Was it Keith the Candido? I don't remember. I'm like, why am I? It's right over there, and I can't even read it because my eyes are old. Yeah. But they did They did a series, 3 books, a trilogy called Star Trek Coda, where they ended the entire Star Trek Litverse. I would actually hire those 3 guys to write a 9-hour Star Trek Coda miniseries and take Discovery, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, and do a Coda finale that shows that all of that was alternate universe and it all ended so it could be in their pocket universe, but then restore the prime timeline.
Right. And by the way, all those characters could still be part of the prime timeline, but just have had different lives.
Yes.
So you can still bring those actors back.
Yes.
But it would be a way of tying everything back up together again.
Yes. Yes, I would do that. By the way, Tom Jr. Jackson says we're a bit out of sync with audio. I don't know why that is. I don't know when that happened, but maybe it's come back. Joey Babui says, if Season 3 lives up to your praise, I'm joining the channel. Hell, I'll probably do so either way because real talk is John Williams to my ears. Respect, gentlemen. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Make it so.
Accident Caller says, letting your son die just because you don't want to break the law regarding synths is hardly moving planets to keep your son alive. Well, that's a reference to Star Trek Picard Season 1. the whole idea about synths was so ill-conceived, I can't even begin to talk about it. It was really...
Yeah, I can't, yeah.
I mean, all you can focus on is Riker lost his son. But yeah, that's pretty stupid. DWOMT says, I'm thrilled that you say there's a reference to the Return novel. That book was a big part of my teenage years during the 1990s. I couldn't put it down. It felt like a great sequel to Generations. Well, first of all, what they call the Odyssey trilogy that the Reeve Stevens wrote with Shatner. It's Ashes of Eden, The Return, and Preserver. Those 3 books are amazing. They're amazing Star Trek, a great sequel to Generations, and all I can say is, Bill, you've probably seen it already. It's in the first 6 episodes. It's so brief.
Yeah, I've seen it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so brief.
It's a holy shit moment when you're watching the episode, because it's like, whoa, wait a minute, did I see what I just thought I saw?
Yeah. You're like, wait,
like
what?
That.
What?
It's like that.
What?
The thing I was talking about too, about the sort of canonizing the Enterprise novels that Andy Mangels and Michael Martin and those guys wrote. It's just a little thing that you see. It's such a subtle little thing. It's a little thing that you see. But when I saw it, it just filled my heart with joy. It really did.
Yeah, the fact that it's in there at all. I mean, look, to be honest, if someone said to me, Rob, you have 1 month to get a Star Trek project off the ground for $100 million. That's all you get. What would you do? Well, Paramount already owns what I would do. I would take
what you're talking about.
I would take the Eric Jedrinson script, Star Trek: The Beginning, which is set
War.
It's the Romulan War script. He already wrote it. He wrote it when Donald DeLine was at Paramount. It got killed by the J.J. Abrams thing and all that. It is... I love the script. Eric Jedrinson was the supervising producer of HBO's Band of Brothers. He didn't know anything. He was the Nicholas Meyer. He could have been the Nicholas Meyer of the aughts.
Yeah.
He didn't know anything about Star Trek. He sat down, watched the episodes, and wrote a beautiful, canonical script about the beginning, the outbreak of the Romulan War. And while the script was only a first draft, there's only 1 draft of it. Paramount already owns it. It's ready to go. Bring back Jedrinson. Here's what I would do. I'd bring back Eric Jedrinson and Terry Matalas, who fucking worked on Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do and as Jedrinson himself said, this script is the Iliad. The second script, which was the Odyssey, and I didn't know what the third script would be, but it's the Romulan War.
Yeah.
And imagine.
And by the way, we should interject. The reason why that's important is because it's the Romulan War and the outcome of the Romulan War that leads to the founding of the Federation.
Correct.
It is the most important, like one of the most seminal events in that continuity.
Now imagine this. This is just what I got reading the script. Here's my opening image of this movie. You have the Paramount Mountain, right? The stars or whatever, you're coming up that river. You go past the Paramount Mountain, over the Paramount Mountain, and you're in the water. You're rushing over the surface of the water. You see the Golden Gate Bridge. You see Starfleet headquarters. You come out and you stop on 3 different hover catamarans racing through San Francisco Harbor past Alcatraz or wherever the fuck they are. And you have all of these Starfleet, they've just graduated cadets of Starfleet Academy. And they're at a regatta racing hover catamarans. And you meet all of your characters.
Oh, that's great.
And
what a great way to introduce a new cast of characters.
Yep. And they're all racing against one another. And who is it overseen by? Admiral Archer.
Yeah.
Watching this, and Tom Hanks as your new commandant or command of Starfleet Command, and this is graduation. This is graduation day. You don't have to watch a fucking Starfleet Academy TV series.
No, right.
You've got your fucking graduates, right?
Right.
And this is the opening scene, and they're in a regatta. How about that as an opening for a Star Trek movie?
Yeah.
Bruh.
what's been really satisfying to me is watching people now over the last 20 years who have gone back to, because Enterprise was like the bastard stepchild at the time it was on. A lot of people didn't like it, but I know a lot of Star Trek fans who've gone back to that show and go, God damn, that was really a lot better than I thought it was. And especially once the show had the freedom, once they brought oh God, I'm spacing on his name now. The showrunner for season 4, who
Oh,
went on to do season 4.
uh, Manny,
Manny Koto.
yeah,
Manny
Manny
Koto.
Koto.
Manny
Yeah.
Koto, who got it. Oh, he
Well,
got it,
when
man.
we were interviewing Brian Braga and Rick Berman for the Enterprise Blu-rays, they joked, we only did the first 3 seasons of Enterprise so we could bring Manny Koto
Right.
to do the
And
Manny Koto could do
it
seasons
was funny
season 4.
to watch like Braga go. Manny's probably like, that's what we should have started to do. That's what we should have started with, what Manny did, and
Well,
built
yeah,
on that.
they and like, to be fair, on Enterprise, they wanted the first season to take place all on Earth, and
Yeah,
the end
so
of
that
season 1 would be the launching of the
that's when
NX-01, and
Enterprise
it would have
launches.
been like the West Wing dealing with the Vulcans, and
Yeah,
but
and
but
it could have been great, but it's like that when you go back and watch this, especially that last season, if you skip the final episode, the ridiculous finale episode, which
and the
is
first
terrible.
episode with the space Nazis,
Yeah, right.
terrible,
But as far as I'm concerned, Enterprise ends with Demons and Terra Prime, and it's a perfect ending. But
perfect
if
ending.
you look at that, skip the first episode, skip the last episode. That is one of the best seasons of Star Trek that I've ever seen. I mean, because everything is building toward the original series, and it's, the humans are starting to like stand on their own, and all these different races are starting to come together in the early seeds of what the Federation becomes. The Federation. That show is so. I love that. I love that. I have a love for that show, and I think if people go back, there's stuff that'll drive you crazy when you watch the early seasons, but there are flashes of greatness in the early seasons. But when you get to like season 4, especially, and season 3 was a direct response to 9/11, so it's a
Right.
very dark season. But that season 4 is maybe my favorite until now, until Picard season 3. That may be my favorite whole season of Star Trek yet, and it's because it's about the love of building toward what we know comes in the future, and it's people need to go back and give that show a fair shake, because it's better than they remembered.
Oh, dude, totally. Can I throw it over to you for just a minute?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna leave you with a question that I want you,
Okay.
again. This comes from Alexander Wilson. I'm gonna hold that.
Okay.
Um, I've already said that too. I can't say that. Well, 200 Watt Studio says,
We could if you want to take a break for like just a minute or two, we could both go and then both come back in a sec. I mean, you want to do
we
that?
can do that. Okay,
Yeah, let's just we'll
listen,
both come
ladies
back
and
in like
gentlemen, boys and girls,
just like 2 or 3 minutes.
give us a moment, and we will be right back. And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, gentle beings, welcome back to the KURLAN, NAISKOS or NAISKOS, however you want to pronounce it, the Star Trek Picard Season 3 After Show with my guest, Bill Hunt from thedigitalbits.com.
This reminds me of my cadet days, but I don't remember having to get up and pee so often.
Touche there, Bill. I had to deal with the pool guy coming over and the dogs going crazy.
I had the mail guy show up too here. I had to go get a package. And by the way, did I see on Instagram that one of your dogs had puppies? Dude, what's the story behind that?
Okay, so here's the thing. Let me explain. 2 days ago, I had 3 dogs. Now I have 11.
Sarah saw that on your Instagram.
I have 11 dogs. So
did you know Rob's dog had puppies? I said, what?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, so we have Gilbert, our elder statesman. He's a Bernedoodle. He's a 25% Bernese Mountain Dog and 75% purebred poodle. He weighs about 70 pounds. He's one of the smartest dogs I've ever met. Then Elizabeth wanted to get another dog, Tallulah. And she wanted a red-headed doodle dog. And I'm like, okay. She couldn't find the red-headed doodle she wanted. And she found one. She comes to me and she goes, I found one. I found a doodle that I want. And I'm like, great. Well, let's go get it. And she's like, well, it's in Pennsylvania and it lives on an Amish farm. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make much sense. And she's like, no, I already talked to my brother who lives in Vermont. He can drive. It's only 900 miles. He can go get the dog, and then he can get it trained in Vermont and then send it to us. I'm like, are you out of your Vulcan mind? But then we got Tallulah. Tallulah is an Irish doodle. She's 50% Irish setter and 50% standard poodle. And she's a sweet dog, very pretty girl. And then Elizabeth decides, well, let's not get her fixed. Let's breed her. And I'm like, why would we want to do that? And then eventually we were renting a house and we had to leave the house and we bought a house. And she's like, we need money to defray the cost of this, And I'm like, okay. And then she sends me a picture of one of the cutest dogs I've ever seen, which was a 100% purebred poodle that was also red-haired, like Tallulah. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh, we have to have that dog. I was ensorcelled by this dog. She goes, yeah, and we can breed them. And I'm like, so I grew up with a crazy cat lady. My mom's a cat lady. So
I understand completely the
cat. So Elizabeth, Sebastian. So we have Gilbert, Tallulah, and Sebastian. And
and now how many puppies?
And this is the funny thing. So we're going to breed them because we figured, and to be mercenary, to sell them because these puppies would be what are called F1B or F1B puppies. So they would be 25% Irish setter and 75% doodle with red hair, which is, pretty rare. And I'm like, okay, so we allowed them to mate. And nature took its course. And yesterday, Tallulah gave birth to 8 puppies that are all very robust and very healthy. And Tallulah is being a fantastic mother. And we're going to sell them at market value, which is very high. And what's good for us is I am tired of living, at the edge of my, making independent movies like Tango Shalom and talking on YouTube is fine. But, I'd like to get ahead of the game. I live in a state of constant financial stress.
Yeah, I understand.
So, I hate to say it, but they're unbelievable, Bill.
Well, you know what? sell them to make the right people.
Well,
And
that's another
them.
thing is at the price we'd sell them for, they'd have to be. And then also we have to do things like you have to get them vaccinated and chipped, and you have to
Oh
do
yeah,
all these
totally.
things.
Yeah.
And we've been following the best. And a lot of people are like, what about all those shelter dogs? Well, yeah, that's true. I agree. There's lots of animals that are in shelters that need homes and all that stuff. But you know what? I need to pay for a house. So I'm like, and our dogs, by the way, I mean, we've treated them. They're the sweetest. Not that dogs, it's not genetic, but we've given these 3 dogs. They're amazing, amazing dogs, and we've treated them very, very well. And I didn't know the joys of having dogs. I'd never had dogs until Gilbert, and amazing. I've had a great time, but now
they're amazing.
I'm a little terrified, to be honest. I was like I don't have children of my own, but Tallulah was in distress and she was barking and I didn't know what to do. And I literally, cause she was in labor. So she was sleeping next to my head and I was just rubbing her tummy, for hours. And what she wanted to do instinctually, we built a little puppy, what's it called? The whelping box and all that. We had all the stuff we needed. And she wanted to go outside and have her dogs outside because it's instinctual. And we're like, no, you have to. So eventually, and she was barking and she was incessant about it. We had to let her go.
And this is the middle of like weather and it's cold outside and all that stuff.
Yes, and we're worried about that. But luckily the weather had broken. So we actually took the whelping, it was like a inflatable pool. But we took it outside and she went in there and she had her puppies. And we didn't want to leave her out there. Then we brought her in. She's actually in our bedroom. And the other 2 dogs were not letting in, which they're not happy about. But there's a whelping box and it was crazy to see. I wasn't there. Sure. I was there when the first 2 were born. Then I went to the John Campea show yesterday, and Elizabeth's like, "There's 5 now. There's 6, 7. There's 8."
Yeah,
and Tallulah's being.
And I spent a couple years living on a farm as a kid. I totally understand it.
It was crazy. So that's my long story about dogs but what's amazing is watching them is transfixing. I'm going to get a camera. I'm just going to start broadcasting on this channel.
Yeah,
like
you
puppy
should.
cam, like live, because when I was looking into, we're already living on a thin financial margin. When I was looking into how much it costs for these dogs to like get vaccinated and all this stuff, I'm like, I already spend all my disposable income on food. If I looked at how much money this past year I spent on food, dog food, because we get premium dog food and all that.
Yeah,
I'm like, I could have bought more hot toys than I already own.
Yeah. It's like obviously I've got. What you can't see behind me is I've got like a row of Eagle transporters from 1612.
Well, right.
I've got my stuff, but over time I've kind of gotten a lot more choosy about the stuff I collect because I realize it's like, man, you can't take it with you. I mean, there's stuff I want to have and that kind of thing. But
having dogs, having animals, what I've been in, and Elizabeth said to me once, and I'll admit to all of you that's watching this show right now, having dogs, I did not know how empathetic and actually intelligent, especially these breeds are, the doodles, and how smart they really are. And while I can't converse with them through language, they definitely understand. I mean, you develop a certain shorthand. They know what you're talking about. They're very empathetic and they understand. And I have no illusions that I'm communicating on an intellectual level with a canine. But like with cats, they're smart animals, and doodles, poodles in general are very smart breeds, but the doodles are cute and all that. But I've had an incredibly enriching experience being a dog owner.
Yeah.
Gilbert's now 5. And Tallulah, it's really interesting. Growing up on an Amish farm, she probably lived outside, and her way of communicating is barking at this one shrill level.
Yeah.
And I've told Elizabeth, I said, this is like having an alien that you're trying to communicate with.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about dogs are you can meet up with them. I mean, the fact that I understand they understand the gestures and the sound level. But when you can say words and they respond to the words for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Yeah. Mammals in particular, and I think it's true of most animals, but I think mammals in particular there's an emotional, like, look, the seeds of what are our emotions and our emotional intelligence is all present in animals. It's a matter of degree, not of kind, right? So,
Right. I mean,
I've
I'm not
certainly
going to say I'm going to stop eating animals. You know, I love
Yeah.
the taste of flesh. But I will say we will discover one day that I think one of the great tragedies of life on Earth is that humanity never really understood how intellectual the creatures we share the planet with actually
I got to tell you, Sarah, we also we've had rats in addition to cats.
Yeah.
And you know, that really shocked me because growing up in North Dakota with animals and cats and dogs, like I've always known how much you can communicate with an animal, how much you can feel common emotions and things like that. And you can read those emotions. You can definitely do that. But I was shocked when I saw that with rats, because you think with rats, like, they're much smaller. The lifespans are very short, but man, I've seen it with rats, and I was shocked. I've kind of basically given up eating red meat. I eat, like, turkey, chicken, fish, that kind of thing. But I have been stunned at how I think we're going to find out eventually all animals experience a degree of this. And
Oh, yeah.
we absolutely ought to treat the natural world a lot better than we do. And we ought to be responsible shepherds of the biosphere, I think.
Oh, it's great because the biosphere will take care of us. The cordyceps
Yeah.
virus will come for us all. We'll be turned into zombie things. I mean, it's all fine. I mean, but yeah, I mean, and again, it's a very Star Trekian thing, like to deal with animals. And for me, it was just funny when Elizabeth said, she figured it out. She's like, because I didn't know how much I would love these dogs and conversing with them and dealing with them, and how she's like, you love these dogs as if you like, and she goes, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. She's like, it's like Star Trek. You think of them as aliens you're meeting for the first time, don't you? And I'm like, you're not wrong. I mean, because the way I treat them and the way she's like, I don't understand. And then she finally got it. She's like, I get it. And I said, this is the closest I'm ever going to come. There's an alien species that I can communicate with, in albeit a small way, on our planet.
Yeah. Yep.
And it made me sad I didn't grow up with dogs, because cats are like, fuck you and your sentimentality.
Actually, I'm going to tell you something. That's 100% not true.
I know. I love
you have to treat a cat like it's a member of your family, right? Not just a pet. Like, but I mean, Charlie here, man. Charlie picked me. The
cats I had.
He's been like, he is attached to me like glue. He's like my shadow. If there was ever an action figure of me, there would have to be a Charlie.
Totally.
It's amazing, and they really do have a depth of emotional intelligence, and each one of them has really unique personalities. And here in our backyard in Orange County, we've got raccoons and possums that show up, and it's extraordinary. And we see it even with those. When we bought the house years ago, we had a raccoon living in our chimney. And like, so raccoons have been part of our neighborhood forever. And we, for years, we have mother raccoons show up, and at night, they know that our backyard is safe. So when they have babies, they'll come to our house at night, and they'll bring their babies, and they'll just play in our backyard. And these mother raccoons know us so well now that, like, with a couple of them, Sarah and I could go outside and sit there with them, and they'll come up to us, crawl in our laps and play.
Yeah.
And they don't do that anywhere else, but in our yard, they know they're safe. And it's remarkable. You see personality in each of them that's unique. And it's really, the natural world is truly like extraordinary if you allow yourself to see it.
And it's all connected. I mean, the Gaia theory is real, and I think that one of the great failings of humanity is we've failed to realize this. I mean, we think we're always outside of nature, and it's very interesting when you hear people talk about, like, whether the global warming is real. I mean, obviously the planet has changed throughout its inceptions.
Yeah.
Its climate is different. But if you don't think spewing particulate matter into the atmosphere, we live in a closed system.
Right.
So when you dump something outside, it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, and what you have to remember too is the world is, I mean, the world seems like a vast place, but the part of the world that we live on is just a really thin layer.
Yeah. I mean,
around the outside. We don't live in the whole world. We live on that really thin skin on the outside. And man, astronauts from space can see the changes we're making to the environment.
Well, Shatner, Shatner goes up to space. He doesn't come back with any kind of a hunky-dory assessment. He's like, it's cold, it's death, it's scary as hell. And that's another thing. Not only, I talk about each human being, each person watching now, there's only one of you. And by the way, when we all went to relieve ourselves, we did lose 100. We lost a third of our audience, but that's okay.
That's okay. They hung with us for 2.5 hours or whatever.
That's right.
When we started, they hung with us for 3 hours. At
noon. We're at 3:27, buddy.
Yeah.
We need to wrap.
They'll come back and catch up with the rest of it.
We need to wrap this up because I have to go on puppy duty. Right now. Elizabeth's mom's watching after the puppies, but I have to go.
You're a daddy. You got to get out there.
And then we got a show on later tonight. By the way,
puppy cam. Let me just say, you want to make some bucks? Puppy cam on your channel will.
Listen. I've calculated. I'm living in deficit. I mean, I understand there are people with nothing in the world, but whatever I can do to monetize, I got to pay for these dogs. I don't even know what I'm going to do. 8. I thought we might have 5. The doctor said, well, you're going to have 5 puppies. I'm like, after an ultrasound, I'm like, how good? The 8? And what's weird is all of them have different personalities.
Yeah.
Like Elizabeth, because what you do is you put colored things on as they're born, so we know who's who. But now she's already talking like, that's Chartreuse over there. I'm like, oh my God, you've already named based on her. Oh. And she's like, there's 5 girls and 3 boys. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Anyway, let's get back to Star Trek and wrap this up, Bill. First of all, Admiral Terrier, Tiberius Mork. Terrier has been a longtime viewer of this channel. He's just been a member. 200 Watt Studio says, I'm just saying I've never seen a nebula looking like that caramel color, if you get my meaning. Don't know what you mean. Maybe tune in next week. Don't know what to say.
Keep watching.
Admiral Terrier says, late to the broadcast, but I was curious to see why Beverly kept Jack from Picard. I totally understood it. It's still unfair towards Picard, but real. Kirk's son died shortly after getting to know his dad.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's so good is that you don't know everything yet.
Right.
You know a lot more than you did last week, but you don't know everything yet. And it's that everything. It's that last little bit that just is like, oh, wow. Wow.
And you're right. And they'll see. Accident Seller says, Star Trek Discovery feels like it was written by BY, is that Brigham Young? BY college girls for college girls. It's very obnoxious. You're not wrong. I mean, it's written by people that certainly don't understand military decorum or have any use for it. And I have to say, that short trek with the Tribbles was,
oh my God.
It was one of it was one of the single most offensive pieces of pop entertainment I've maybe ever seen.
Yeah, that really made my brain bleed.
It was a low point for the franchise, even after things like Sub Rosa, Spock's Brain, and The Children Shall Lead. That Star Trek Discovery short take was the very worst thing to ever happen to the Star Trek franchise, and that got approved by people.
I know, and it. By the way, if you watch that, you want to know what the difference is between the Star Trek we really love, actual Star Trek, and what's happening now. Like that's par for the course. There it is right there. You don't need to watch anything else.
No.
To understand why people like Rob and I are like just have a hemorrhage every time we try to watch this stuff.
It's truly offensive, and the fact that it exists and the people that made it actually thought it was good.
Yeah,
I mean,
Starfleet is a professional organization, man. These people are the best of humanity, and to see people acting the way they do on some of these other shows as members of Starfleet is like, no, I don't buy it. I
Yeah,
just
no,
don't buy it.
that episode is it's
Yeah,
anti-human, to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
It really was. It
yeah.
was.
It's legit terrible. It's legit terrible.
It's really a god awful. 200 Watt Studio says that's what I meant. Even though the relaunch book's timeline was retconned, I'm hoping that some things that happen in them are referenced. Well, meaning in the books. I mean, look, I I loved Star Trek novels because they were written by people that love Star Trek.
Yeah,
And the way that John Van Citters handled the Star Trek litverse was terrific. And I will always, as much as John Van Citters might not love me, I do love John Van Citters for doing that because I grew up loving Star Trek novels, and he
yeah.
brought a luster and a polish to the Star Trek litverse that was really respectable and
And look,
worth.
the very fact that Riker was the captain of the Titan and that's now part of canon is, is a nod to the litverse.
Yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. And people like Sean Tarangio, who designed the Titan, his design's canonical now, as
Yep.
we've seen, which is amazing.
Mhm.
Accident Seller says LaForge's helmsman daughter chick-splaining the tractor beam in Valley Girl voice in episode 2 was so obnoxious. Well,
I think
it's-
that's a nitpick.
it might be. I mean,
That's a little bit of a nitpick.
Look, I think that actress, Miss Chestnut, first of all, she's so cute, not that that matters, but her scene with Seven of Nine, when she comes to check up on Seven of Nine
Yeah.
and calls her Seven of Nine, that's
Yeah,
a
Commander
Star Trek.
Seven.
That's as Star Trek as it gets.
Yeah, and you've only just really met this character. She's got a lot more to offer in this season, and it's, look, I get that. This is what happens, I think, when people are exposed to a lot of stuff that drives them crazy over time.
Yeah.
You get in this mode where you're skeptical and you're just kind of sitting back taking pot shots at like things. And it's like, I get it. I understand why you're in that mode. I totally understand. But like, just trust us when we say this season of Star Trek Picard is just have a little faith and be open to it, and it'll win you. It'll win you over. I can't imagine any real fan of Star Trek not being won over by this series, especially by the end of the 4th episode.
Oh my God, dude.
But I mean, it's like just hang with it. Hang with it. Don't get so wrapped up in nitpicking the things that drive you crazy that you don't give this season a fair shot to win you over, because this season, more than any other Star Trek in 25 plus years, deserves a fair shot to win you over.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, look, I understand where all that comes from. I mean, I do.
Yeah, I do too.
Tom Jr. Jackson says, "Did you forget about episode 3 of Picard?" No, we just look. We go off on tangents.
Well, we talked about it for.
It's true. It's true.
2 hours, and then we're talking about other stuff too.
200 Watt Studio, in reference to Star Trek: The Force Awakens, says, "I was done when Maz Kanata said it's another story for another time." You mean Luke's lightsaber? What
Right.
the fuck? That was
Right.
J.J. Abrams saying "F you" to the audience. I'm lazy. Look, I think the Star Wars: The Force Awakens, I mean, it made $2 billion. I can say now, it's a terrible screenplay. It does every character dirty. Terrible. It's just not good. Don't dig it. Tony Reyes. By the way, Tony, thank you for supporting the channel. $20 super chat. Tony Reyes says, Rob, to prove your theory correct, I introduced Star Wars for the first time to my wife, and I started with episode 1. When we get to the sequels, it completely lost her interests. She can't get through them, and I don't blame her. And let me just give a shout out to Tony. He's been a long-time fan of this channel, been watching for years. I finally met his wife, I think, on our last member call. His wife is this unbelievably beautiful woman who's incredibly smart and allows him to build Mobile Suit Gundam models and says, I'll help. And he actually says, oh, great, honey. I mean, not that Elizabeth couldn't build Gundam models, but I don't know if I want her anywhere near them. But so Tony knows what's up, and so does his wife. So if his wife doesn't like the sequels,
nerd thing, man, and you've got to be allowed. And if you find someone who allows you to like fly your nerd flag once in a while, I mean, you've won. That's what winning looks like in life.
Yeah. It's true. Lava 1701 says, "Hi Rob, big fan of your show. I just want to say that you're the only reason I'm watching this season of Picard. Thank you for bringing awareness to the fans that this is indeed great Star Trek." Well, you know what? I'm glad you guys are watching. Look, for me, it's self-evident. What Terry Matalas and his writing staff and everyone has done is the proof is in the pudding. I can tell you a million different things, but what I say doesn't matter. What matters is the show itself. And it's been, I have to say, Bill, isn't it interesting to watch the change? I mean, the people that watch it like Nerdrotic and Critical Drinker, they got to see a chunk of it, as you have now seen.
Yeah.
It wins you over. Ultimately, there's a point where you have to capitulate and say, this is really good.
Look, bottom line is if you're a longtime Star Trek fan, and I've been a Star Trek fan since, my first memories are watching the original series in syndication. I mean, I've been a fan as long as I can remember. If you've had that experience of Star Trek and you're familiar with all the various incarnations of it, you can't, it when you see it, man. You know Star Trek when you see it. And we really haven't seen Star Trek much in the last 20 years. And now it's like, this is it. And the first instinct is you don't quite trust it because this looks like it, but is it really? Is it going to take a left turn somewhere and not, and it doesn't. This is Star Trek, and it stays that way. And it really hits home the next episode. The next episode really makes you go, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Captain Fandom Nerd is a new member of the channel. Thank you, Captain Fandom Nerd. And finally, Jay says, "Why does New Trek have such a dark look?" Now, here's the thing, Bill. It didn't look too dark on the movie screen at the Chinese, did it?
No.
And when I saw it, I've seen the whole season 3 times through. I never thought it looked too dark. I thought it had
I think what's happening here is people are conflating a couple of things. If you think it looks too dark, just visually dark, go back and watch Generations. Go back and look at the Star Trek feature films, and especially with Generations, it gets very much more evocative and moody and cinematic, right? And all of those Next Generation films are like that. So this is kind of a piece with that. But the other thing I think when people say it's dark, so dark, it's also just the kind of Star Trek we've been given. It feels like a very just in terms of the themes and the world, it feels like a very negative, very violent, very not welcoming place. And I think that there's, so I think sometimes those two things get conflated. But in terms of the look of it, obviously it is much more cinematic than it has been in a long time. And if you go back, but if you go back to the Next Generation feature films, I maintain, even go back even to the original feature films after the motion picture, Star Trek 2 is a much more atmospheric. It's like you're in a submarine kind of an environment.
But I have to say what's really fascinating to me. So I have 2 main screens in my house. I have a 65-inch OLED and a 65-inch plasma that's 10 years old. Star Trek Picard Season 3 looks absolutely beautiful on my plasma. And I have to say that I've tweaked both of these screens within an inch of their lives. I've professionally calibrated them. Well, I'm not professional, but I've used a calibration disc.
Yeah.
The show looks amazing on my plasma. It looks amazing. And last night, I'm like, I love the look of the show. I loved the look of the show when I first saw it.
Yeah, me too.
On my OLED, it looks like shit. It's way too dark. The detail is crushed. You can't, and I know.
So Picard is Picard Season 3 is, and I think modern Star Trek in general, it's very much designed for a cinema environment. And the problem is that if you're we're obviously, all about home theater and home cinema. And so we've got equipment that is designed for that, and we've set it up and calibrated it for that. And so we get a very, very cinematic experience. But if you just pull a TV out of the box and you leave all the default settings on, that's a problem with TVs. I mean, for years, before high def television, the television standard, the analog 4:3 was called NTSC. Which stood for National Television Standards Board, I believe, is what NTSC.
Which was, by the way, the worst television standard globally. We sucked.
Right. Other people had PAL and CCAM in Europe and things, but the joke about NTSC was that it actually stood for Never Twice the Same Color.
Right.
Because every single TV series,
terrible.
Every single television set, people had the red way up too high, or the brightness too high, or the sharpness up too high, and every time you saw a new TV, somebody had their settings all out of whack. And like now it's getting better, especially with this filmmaker mode on a lot of like TV series.
But even then, like my OLED has filmmaker mode, and it's an LG, but I still tweaked it within an inch of its life. And by the way, my OLED, when I watch my discs, especially, it is chef's kiss.
Yep.
However, watching streaming shows, although I have to say that's not fair, watching like Disney Plus, the Avengers films, Dolby, look amazing on my OLED.
Yeah, but
Picard looks way better on my plasma.
Yeah. It's just basically down to the cinematographer and the colorist that's making the choices and who's pushing what buttons at Paramount Plus when you see it on your stream. It's complicated, and hopefully the industry is moving toward a place where these things are figured out, so it's seamless, so you don't even have to worry about it. But we're still in a world where if you buy a television, some televisions are better than others, and they all kind of need a little bit of calibration out of the box to look really perfect.
Bill, Paul in Long Beach sends in a tip and says, "I'm not going to lie, Rob. Some of us miss the old Thursday rant. Stubble, Vesna, and myself especially enjoyed the old days. I'm happy for you, buddy." Well, first of all, I miss Vesna. I hope she's well. I haven't heard from her in a while. I love her. Look, I can't rant about this because I love it. I do, and I want to say what Terry Matalas has done, because to me it's all about, you know what? Not only does it feel like a 10-hour movie, it feels like reading a Star Trek novel.
Yeah.
And by a Star Trek novelist that loves Star Trek, like David Mack, or like Christopher Bennett, like Diane Duane, like the Reeves Stevens. It's different. It feels real. It feels, and I don't expect it to look like, 80s Next Generation, as much as I love it, it does feel of a time that maybe never existed, from a dream realm or something. But
and it's all, there's also there's a tendency in fandom now to be mad about everything,
right?
To be aggrieved about everything, to be angry about everything. And I get it I get it. Look, when you love things, when you love a thing, and then for whatever reason, because they're targeting a new audience or for business reasons or whatever, the thing you love changes. It can be upsetting, but you look out in the real world and there are real things worth being upset about.
Yeah.
I kind of, having taken a step back from many of the things I love over time, and then kind of gotten perspective and remembered why I love them and kind of come back to them. I think what I've come to realize is that if your fandom just makes you mad all the time, if your fandom leads you to be on every forum and every social media thing, and you're just ranting about how much you hate this, that, and you join a crusade, we've got to fight these people and we've got to support these people. Like, if that's where your fandom leads you, I think you're kind of doing it wrong. I think Rob, you and I grew up in a time when fandom was united us all.
Well, but there was not as much of it, and also
It was not as much of it, but it was about sharing your love of this stuff and finding people who felt the same way you did, and it was a positive experience, and I think it should be a positive experience. And I think if you find yourself spending more than 50% of your time angry and negative, I think, trust me from experience, take a little step back and recalibrate a little bit. And
I agree.
Go out, look at the stars, man. Walk out, get fresh air. And kind of come back to it and remember what you loved about it. Remember about what you loved about it, and focus on that.
Bill, I think that's there's no better place to finish this amazingly epic episode of the KURLAN NAISKOS, the Star Trek Picard Season 3 after show. I want to thank you, Bill Hunt. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me obviously at thedigitalbits.com, my website where I've been working for 25 years, but especially on Twitter and Facebook at Bill Hunt Bits. And I'm especially on Twitter. I'm on there a lot, and I tend to answer questions, interact with people a little bit more. And that's also where I tend to post breaking home video and home theater news and video disc news first before it goes on the website. I share it there first. So that's where you can find me.
Well, I want to thank everyone who's watched this after show, who's supported the channel generously with super chats and tips and memberships and all of that. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week with another episode. Tonight, Midnight Musings comes back with and Lael Rockwell. We'll be talking about more fan stuff, maybe a little bit of Picard, probably not, mostly Marvel and Star Wars and all that. The Mandalorian Season 3, boy, I can't wait to talk about the show. But anyway,
talking about Picard next week's episode.
Oh, next week. Well, you're welcome to come back.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, well, I'll bring you back. Episode 4, which is, as the kids say, a banger. It's a great episode. Can't wait for everyone to see it. But I want to thank all of you for joining us for this Picard after show. And other than live long and prosper. But I'd rather kick ass like Worf does with his new, it's called a KURLAN, I believe.
KURLAN, I think you're right.
A KURLAN designed by Dan Curry.
And there's where it all began.
There's where
the season all began.
That's right, with a little chirping of that original Enterprise comm badge from the Enterprise D. And now we are on the Titan A. So let's hear it for that. I love that ship, by the way. I don't care. Bill Krause, you did a great job designing that. 100%. I love it. Because nobody wants an oval in space. Circles are way more stable. That's all I have to say. Bill, thanks.
I love the Constitution, the Neo Constitution.
I know.
I love the lines. It's hard to improve on that original Matt Jeffries design, man.
I know.
So beautiful.
I'm right there with you. Well, sir, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week for episode 4.
My pleasure.
All right. And we are out.